Grindelbuster, A+. Draco's luck was undoubtedly rank EX. Once again, he had drawn a noble phantasm surpassing rank A. He couldn't help but suspect that the system was rigged to grant him favorable outcomes. After all, so far, only Kuroka's fate skill could be considered subpar. As always, Draco asked the system to display the noble phantasm's description. Grindelbuster, primal conflict. Type, noble phantasm. Owner, Beowulf. Description, this noble phantasm represents Beowulf's legendary battle prowess, even after losing both his swords, Hrunting and Nagling. The concept of slaying Grendel itself has become a noble phantasm, allowing Beowulf to unleash his primeval strength. When activated, Beowulf gains overwhelming physical power to crush his target through sheer brute force, throwing, punching, and kicking with unparalleled might. Unique trait. Since the attack embodies the primitive weaponry of barehanded combat, it nullifies noble phantasms and skills reliant on grasping or perceiving attacks after seeing them once. Draco analyzed the noble phantasm carefully. At first glance, it seemed incredibly powerful. Sage's description framed it as a raw, destructive attack, but Draco saw it differently. To him, it embodied the legendary moment when Beowulf, stripped of his swords, defeated Grendel using nothing but his own body. It felt akin to his fate skill branch destruction, albeit with more intricate conditions. However, those conditions were a concern. The noble phantasm required the destruction of two specific weapons, Hrunting and Nagling, for activation. They didn't possess those swords, which rendered the ability dormant unless equivalent weapons were broken. This limitation was its only drawback, though Draco recognized the immense potential it could unlock. But what could he do with it now? Is something bothering you, Draconia? Kuroka's soft voice broke his train of thought. Draco blinked, pulled from his musings, and noticed the worried looks on the faces of his companions. Apparently, his furrowed brow and silence had made them uneasy. I'm just thinking, he reassured them. I've received a noble phantasm, but it's a bit tricky to figure out. Give me a moment to clarify things. Without waiting for their response, Draco dove back into a mental conversation with Sage. Tell me, isn't this noble phantasm completely useless without those two swords? Sage, at first glance, yes. But the description I provided applies to Beowulf's use of the noble phantasm. It adapts when wielded by another, so it will adjust to the person receiving it. Sage, correct. Just as Castor's noble phantasm and your own adjusted to fit their users. This one will as well. Take Levitian, for example. When you couldn't handle its heat, it sealed itself and granted you branch destruction instead. So, if I give this to Zoe, it'll adapt to her? Sage, exactly. Zoe's bow, while not a noble phantasm, is of exceptionally high quality, almost a pseudo-noble phantasm. If her bow is destroyed in battle, this noble phantasm will activate. Draco now understood its mechanics. The noble phantasm was clearly best suited for Zoe. While he, Kuroka, or Mordred could technically use it, their weapons were far harder to destroy. Zoe's bow, on the other hand, offered the ideal condition for activation. He made his decision. Assign this noble phantasm to Zoe, Draco instructed. Turning his attention back to the group, Draco smiled. Almost instantly, Zoe's expression shifted to one of surprise. So this is a noble phantasm? Zoe murmured, her voice tinged with awe. Draco nodded. Yes, it's a straightforward one. If your bow breaks during battle, you'll gain a significant boost to your physical attributes. Zoe nodded again, though her gaze remained contemplative. I feel like I instinctively understand how it works, as if the knowledge has been ingrained in me. This response wasn't surprising to Draco. Just like with Kuroka's noble phantasm, Zoe had gained an intuitive grasp of her newfound power. Now you're a true servant, Mordred teased, smirking. Zoe hesitated, unsure of how to react. Becoming a servant to Draco was never something she had envisioned for herself. Her feelings were a complicated swirl of uncertainty, but she chose to accept her new reality without complaint. Draco addressed the group once more. I'm giving you all a few days to spend with everyone here. Our journey will take us over a decade, though for them, it will pass in an instant. Don't mention anything about traveling to another universe. Just enjoy your time together as if it's an ordinary day. Got it, the three girls replied in unison, their voices filled with determination. A morning of chaos and warmth. Draco had woken up early, as usual, but found himself unable to leave the bed. The reason? 5 girls clinging to him from every possible angle, rendering him utterly immobile. On his right arm was Natsum, her brown hair cascading down as she slept peacefully with her head resting on his shoulder. The soft rise and fall of her breathing, coupled with the rare sight of her hair loose, gave her an irresistible charm. While Natsum's figure wasn't as prominent as Kuroka's or Lavinia's, her curves were still well above average, and Draco couldn't help but appreciate the warmth of her embrace. On his left arm, Lavinia was draped even more intimately. The golden-haired beauty lay half atop him, her upper body pressing against his chest as if claiming him entirely. Unlike Natsum's shy hold, Lavinia's embrace was bold and unreserved, a reflection of her more open-minded upbringing in Europe. The cultural differences between the two women were stark. Natsum's reserved nature, shaped by Japanese societal norms, had slowed her relationship's progress with Draco. In contrast, Lavinia's Western background had made her more comfortable expressing affection. Draco's satisfaction was evident as his hands instinctively rested on both girls' hips, appreciating the soft curves beneath his palms. He nodded to himself in approval. Yes, good hips. Justice for the lower half of the body. After all, he believed Issei's obsession with breasts was narrow-minded. Women's bodies deserve to be admired in their entirety. You seem to be enjoying yourself, Nya, a playful voice teased. Draco's gaze shifted upward to meet Kuroka's golden eyes, sparkling with mischief as she lay sprawled atop his torso. Yes, I am enjoying myself, Draco replied without hesitation. Good morning, Kuroka. Kuroka's teasing smile softened into something more affectionate as she leaned in to kiss him. Good morning. Aren't you training today? Draco sighed, his lips curling into a wry smile. Do you think I can move in this situation? Indeed, with Lavinia and Natsum pinning his arms and Kuroka lounging on his chest, he was effectively trapped. Adding to his predicament, his legs were firmly held by 2 smaller figures at the foot of the bed, Akino, snuggled against his right leg, and Chiron, hugging his left. Their peaceful faces made it impossible for Draco to even consider waking them. How could anyone disturb such cuteness? He thought, resigning himself to his fate. Kuroka, can you help me out here? He asked hopefully. Kuroka tilted her head as if considering his request before smirking. No, why not? Because I don't want to Nya, she said, her teasing tone accompanied by a giggle. Draco could only groan in defeat as Kuroka nestled herself more comfortably on him, clearly enjoying his helplessness. And so he stayed trapped for another 3 hours. A new day begins. 3 hours later, the house slowly stirred to life. Natsum was the first to wake up, her eyes fluttering open. She froze momentarily, realizing the intimate position she was in. Her face turned crimson as she hastily sat up, clutching the sheets. I'm so sorry, she exclaimed, bowing her head in apology. I didn't mean to. Draco, however, was far from upset. His eyes wandered to the accidental display of her cleavage as she bent forward, and he smirked. There's no need to apologize, Natsum. I didn't mind. Natsum's cheeks flushed even deeper. Dear, before she could say more, Draco leaned in and silenced her with a gentle kiss. Her surprise melted into acceptance as she returned the kiss, their lips moving in sync. When they parted, her breath came in soft gasps, her face a brilliant shade of red. Good morning, Natsum, Draco said warmly. Good morning, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Draco could savor the moment, a pair of arms wrapped around his neck from behind. Dear, and me too, Lavinia's airy voice chimed in. Of course, my eyes princess, Draco said with a chuckle, turning to meet her lips. Lavinia's kiss was slower, more deliberate, and filled with a yearning that tugged at his heart. When they finally parted, a thin thread of saliva still connected them. As the tender moment lingered, an irritated voice broke the peace. "What are you doing so early in the morning?" The shout came from Mordred, who had just woken up on the other side of the bed. Her face was a mix of grogginess and annoyance as she glared at the group. "Ugh, this dragon empress will kill whoever yelled," Valina groaned, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "I was sleeping so well." "Mordred, relax," Draco said, raising a hand in mock appeasement. "Flat chests are justice, after all. You son of a—" Mordred growled, her fists clenching in fury. Before she could launch herself at Draco, Valina intercepted her, and the two girls devolved into a playful scuffle. Draco watched the scene with amusement until a soft, drowsy voice drew his attention. "Good morning," Akino mumbled, rubbing her eyes as she sat up. "I want to sleep more, Ne-sama," Chiron muttered, burying her face in a pillow. Draco chuckled softly. With all the girls now awake, or in the process of waking up, he could officially declare it a new day. "All right, everyone," he said, clapping his hands lightly to get their attention. "Let's get moving. We got a lot to do today." The girls groaned and stretched, slowly pulling themselves together. As chaotic as the morning had been, it was moments like these that made Draco cherish the strange, yet wonderful life he had built with his companions.
Hey everyone, Quantum Audiobook here. Sorry for interrupting, but if you're enjoying this content, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your thoughts on this novel in the comments, and don't forget to like the video.
The morning had begun in a special way for Draco. Maybe special isn't really the right word, but different. Since Draco hadn't been able to train since early morning, he had decided to take the morning off and spend time with everyone. "I'm going to Grigori today to see your training," Draco said as they ate breakfast. "Really?" Akino asked from the corner of the table. Draco nodded. "I'm going to take the morning off. I want to see how much you've improved in the last few weeks." Draco hadn't seen how much improvement Dawn's members who were still in training had made. When he went to Grigori, Draco focused on Raynair's training. All he knew came from the words of Barakiel, who had said that everyone had improved quite a bit. He also wanted to see how Koga and Shigen were adapting to this new life. Like the other 4 teenagers affected by the Utsusimi Agency and Satinel, they had to adapt to the situation. They lived the problem more seriously, and Koga was even experienced hard, so they should take less time to adapt. Draco was more concerned about Shigen than Koga, as the girl seemed to have no fighting skills, and her sacred gear was quite dangerous, or so Draco had been informed. Taoya, a fiend capable of absorbing any kind of attack. Draco remembered how this little monster swallowed an attack capable of blinding even beings from Tier 4, even with the potential for more. If it were to activate his true form, perhaps Draco would have trouble defeating him without using Levitian or his dragon form. Draco also wanted to talk to Azazel about developing Koga's abnormal ability to activate a false balance breaker. Although it was true that this ability took away part of Koga's life expectancy, it gained a boost in all his stats quite high. In case someone doesn't remember, I'll put the statistics of Koga without balance breaker and with balance breaker. Koga Hyusuke. Race human. Status normal. HP 93 of 93. Strength 21. Defense 14. Magic 10. Agility 26. Koga Hyusuke. Race human. Status normal. HP 93 of 93. Strength 853. Defense 360. Magic 560. Agility 1285. It was not a boost to the level of the real scale males, since this fake balance breaker was based on them, but it was still very powerful. In fact, Draco estimated that it was more powerful than Issei's incomplete balance breaker, although it was still weaker than Valina's. Still, it should definitely be lower than the real scale male, although Draco didn't know by how much. Despite the cost, this was an artificial balance breaker that raised Koga's power to the maximum that a Tier 3 could reach, even reaching the domain of Tier 4 in some of its statistics. Azazel and Draco had talked about this before, coming to an agreement for Azazel to investigate more about this false balance breaker, while at the same time looking for a cure for the cost it carried on Koga's body. Draco was sure that Natsume, Cookie, and Tobio had improved a lot in the last few weeks, especially Tobio. The boy seemed to have an enormous talent with blades, and he made a perfect team with Canis Lycan. Last but not least, Draco also wanted to see improvement in the younger ones. Issei, Akino, and Nico were also training to become stronger. Although their training was tailored to their abilities, it was just as hard as others' training. In particular, Draco was worried about Nico. It had barely been a week since Nico began his training, and although the boy and the others had said he was doing well, Draco wanted to see for himself. But we don't start physical training until mid-morning when we finish with the theory classes, Natsume said. Are you going to be with us too, while Barikil-sensei teaches us theoretical material? Draco did not hesitate to respond. No, thank you. I will come later. A chill ran down Draco's back as he thought about going to class. Maybe this must have been a trauma from his past life, or maybe he was allergic to lectures. Natsume shrugged. Do what you want, I doubt you need that knowledge anyway. Yes, Draco knew practically everything there was to know about this world. No, he knew much more than that. He was the only one who knew with any approximate certainty what was going to happen in the future. So what are you going to do? Valina asked with a strange twinkle in her eye. She probably wanted to fight him again. Draco gave it serious thought. What was he going to do for the next 3 hours? His eyes wandered around the table, looking at all the girls sitting here, until they finally stopped at a red-eyed blonde beauty. I think I know, said Draco as he looked at Valerie, who was eating her breakfast in silence. I need to talk to you in private, Valerie. It's important. Valerie looked up in surprise. She obviously didn't expect Draco to call her. This, along with the sudden attention she had gained from the other girls thanks to Draco's words, caused her to nod weakly. A slight blush on her face as she looked away. Can vampires blush? They should not, as they have no blood. But Valerie is different. She's not a vampire, but a damper. Like Gaspar Vladi, Valerie Teeps is a hybrid between human and vampire. It made sense, since this was the only way someone with vampire genes could get a sacred gear of any kind. No, Valerie can't go with you, Deering. Surprisingly, it was Lavinia who refused what Draco said. Draco did not bother to hide his surprise when he asked Lavinia. Why? We have to study? Lavinia folded her arms. And we cannot leave these studies aside. Draco grimaced. He was unaware of Lavinia's strict teaching. Can't you just let her go for a couple of hours? Come on, it's okay if she doesn't study math for a day. In the end, the vast majority of things you study are useless in life. Well, it would be different if we were talking about math used in human magic. Unlike the devil's magic, the magic humans use that was created by Merlin based on the devil's magic uses mathematical principles and a lot of complicated formulas. That is why Draco gave up on learning magic long ago, since he was not willing to waste years of his life learning magic. Perhaps some other time when all the DxD events occur and Draco has all the time in the world to spend, he will learn magic. In the meantime, Draco preferred to invest his time in training his Tuki and other skills. But Dra-kun, we're not going to study math. Don't you remember? Valerie and I are trying to fully discover the powers of her Longinus. Draco recalled. That's right, so there's no problem. You can come with us, Lavinia. It is related to your sacred gear after all. Oh, if Dra-kun says so, I guess it's okay. Lavinia copied the gesture Natsume had made earlier, shrugging her shoulders. Meanwhile, Valerie, the most involved of the three, just looked on without saying anything. During all these months, even though she had opened up a little more with 3 or 4 of the girls, she still found it hard to open up to others. Zoe, being the way she was, felt that this was something strange. Oh, yes. Zoe had breakfast with the group every morning. Over the past few days, she had become very close to Valerie. Although the damper was suspicious of her at first, she could now be considered one of the few people who had heard Valerie's voice daily. Well, they were neighbors. Their rooms were next to each other, as they were the only ones living on the third floor. Are you sure? Zoe asked her, whispering in her ear. Do you really want to go with Draco, Valerie? Valerie looked at her and nodded again. Why? Valerie hesitated a bit, then spoke. I owe them too much, so I want to help them. Her soft voice barely reached Zoe's ears. Aren't they forcing you? Zoe asked again. It was normal to hesitate. Zoe knew how dark the world was, and even more so for a weak Longinus user like Valerie. Many organizations would like to capture her in order to experiment with her and discover all the uses of the Sephiroth Grail. In response, Valerie shook her head. Zoe nodded and looked at Draco, who was stroking Valina's head while laughing at something. The boy was a mystery to her. What were his true thoughts? What did he really want? Who was really the dragon called Draco? Shikoku, Ehime Prefecture. Deep inside a certain cave in the mountains, several people from the Magicians of Oz were entering into a room deep underground. The underground place was a spaciously built cave. Countless mysterious fires floating in midair served as a light source. The one before the witches was a monster releasing an intense and powerful ghostly air. A large animal about 20 meters in size. The large eyes that stared at them shone with an ominous red brilliance, and sharp fangs grew in its mouth that could easily swallow a human whole. Its four limbs were also extremely thick, and beyond those, their eyes were drawn to a very thick and long tail. Around the large animal were gathered countless beasts, whose eyes glittered ominously. The witches of Oz, who wore deep hoods, greeted the large beast. It is a pleasure to meet you. The legendary Yukai, Inagami Gyubu-sama. In that manner, the witches called out to the large beast, this great Yukai. Inagami Gyubu, called the chief of the supernatural Tanuki. He possessed a level of ability that wasn't inferior to that of Yasakahime, the Kyubi no Kitsune, the leader of the Yukai overseeing Kyoto. The enormous Yukai, Inagami Gyubu, after giving the witches a sharp glare, spoke with no apparent amusement. Just what business do Western magic users have with me? Having understood the displeasure of the other party, the witches threw a straight pitch. Are you familiar with the dog god of the Black Blade, Canis Lycans? At those words, the innumerable beasts surrounding the witches, the supernatural Tanuki that were Inagami Gyubu's followers, began making noises. Inagami Gyubu let out a snort and spoke. Yeah, it's one of the unusual powers said to have been made by the god of you Christians. Recently, it's been reported to me that a possessor of it has awoken in this country. Letting out a great sigh, Inagami Gyubu turned away and replied, Get out of here. I dislike the scent of foreign witches. It's irritating my nose. Inagami Gyubu spoke while making 4 sniffing sounds with his nose. However, the witches continued without hesitation. And if it should happen that the aforementioned Canis Lycan is residing in someone originating from the 5 principal clans, at this single statement, the underling supernatural Tanukis became even noisier, and even Inagami Gyubu narrowed his eyes and gazed directly at the witches. The witch continued to display a thin smile on her lips. I have been listening to rumors. They say that you hold a considerable grudge against those 5 clans. In response to what was contained in what the witch said, Inagami Gyubu made an assertion while showing bared fangs. You're quite indirect, you Western witches. If you have something to say it clearly. If you're simply turning to me for the cooperation of a mighty apparition of power, then it would have been fine to hold talks with Samoto or a Koguru, or surely old man Nurei Hyon. Among those ranked as great Yukai that live in this country, we've come to you precisely because we've heard that you are curious about the most interesting things. We judged that only you would become interested when we said we want to attack the inner sanctuary. The witch held out her hand, pointing upwards, and from it made a small magic circle appear. While the magic circle released light, a certain thing was summoned. Releasing a sinister, ghostly presence, it was a sphere about the size of a soccer ball. While showing the sphere releasing the ghostly presence to Inagami Gyubu, the witch spoke. We are contriving a plan to attack the inner sanctuary. While you retaliate against the 5 principal clans by all means, We'd like you to be the opponent of Canis Lycaon and his guardian. Inugami Gyubu studied the sphere, releasing the ghostly presence while squinting. Oh ho, so that's a yukai? Even I've never seen one like that guy. Oh my, seems this comes with a slightly interesting story. Your words have changed my mind. After finishing breakfast, everyone dispersed. The only ones who stayed were Lavinia, Valerie, and Draco. Although Valerie usually studied with Chiron, there were days when the youngest of the Nekash's sisters would leave with Mordred for private training. It was precisely at those times that Lavinia would help Valerie discover more about her Longinus. Draco was really curious about Chiron's fighting style. Maybe he was going to stop by after he finished with Lavinia and Valerie. Draco felt that he had left the little Nekashu aside for a long time. But, for the moment, Draco had to focus on Valerie and her sacred gear. Leaving the dining room, Draco and the two girls took the elevator down to the first basement. This was the floor dedicated to entertainment and training. They entered one of the special rooms, which was usually used as a training room. Once inside, Draco took his time to get to the main subject. "Tell me, Valerie, how is your life being here?" Draco asked. Valerie, who had been walking a step behind Draco and Lavinia as they talked on the road, had her head down. Although she raised her head a little when Draco addressed her, she was slow to respond. "I am good," Valerie stuttered. "Yes? That's great." Despite Valerie's obvious difficulties communicating with Draco, he smiled politely. Draco knew Valerie's circumstances, and he also knew Valerie's future circumstances if Mordred hadn't rescued her. Unfortunately, it was too late when Mordred had arrived in Romania, as the experiments with Valerie had already begun. It was true that Draco could have arrived earlier to save Valerie, but he had not done so, as he did not know where he was in the timeline. It wasn't until he met Valina that he could guess more or less how many years were left before the critical year arrived. Valerie nodded to Draco's words, but did not respond verbally. Meanwhile, Lavinia only smiled as she watched Draco's attempts to gain Valerie's trust. Valerie's encounters with Draco had been few and far between. They consisted of small casual encounters where Draco would greet Valerie, and she would respond with a gesture most of the time, and hopefully sometimes say a few words. Draco had not wanted to force anything on Valerie because of the previous issue. He, who knew what she would suffer, had not been able to save her before the experiments with her began. The same had happened with Kuroka, being that when he saved her, they had already experimented with her. Whereas with Chiron and Aquino, he had saved them in time. He understood that not everyone could be saved, and he also understood that it was impossible to save either of them in time. They had already experimented with Kuroka by the time Draco came into this world, and Valerie had decided to sacrifice herself to save Gasper many years before Draco was reincarnated. Still, Draco still had a bit of a guilty conscience. Perhaps this was one of the few human traits he still had, although he had lost most of them over time. There isn't a single healthy-minded human who thinks of living beings as experience points, or who has the idea of eradicating a third-world country just to level up. That, along with the various events that had kept him busy for a long period of time, had caused Draco not to ask Valerie about the girl's Longinus. The training room was quite large and was designed so that people could watch the training match. There was an indoor room where Draco and the two girls were currently, with 2 tables and 4 chairs surrounding each of them. They were sitting around one of those tables, with Valerie and Lavinia sitting to Draco's right and left respectively. "Well," Draco said, "first of all, tell me everything you know about the Sephiroth Grail." Inside the training room, Draco was sitting at a table with Lavinia and Valerie. "First of all, tell me everything you know about the Sephiroth Grail." That was what Draco had told them. Although he knew a lot about the Sephiroth Grail, he wanted to see if Lavinia had discovered anything else. After all, Valerie's Longinus was a special case, a mutation, so it could contain many more powers than had been discovered in the light novels. Lavinia shook her head. "All the information I have comes from the writings I have managed to obtain from Grausauber," Lavinia said. She pulled out a folder that said classified information and passed it to Draco. Obviously, this folder was very important to one of the most influential magicians' organizations in the supernatural world, Grausauber. Lavinia, who knew of the importance of this document, had no hesitation in handing it over to Draco. In that folder, there were many papers, but many of them were not really important. Obviously, everything was about the Sephiroth Grail, but the great majority spoke of this Longinus's past holders. All this was not important information for Draco. Far from it. What really mattered to Draco was the abilities of this sacred gear. As an ancient and powerful organization, Grail should have a lot of information about this Longinus abilities. And that's what Draco was looking for. In the end, he didn't take long to find it. What it said was this. Abilities? The Sephiroth Grail has the ability to make contact with the principle of life, where the possessor is being forcefully told about how the life and soul is made. The possessor also takes in the mind and the concept of the dead, the living, and various other things as they use the Holy Grail, which would result in the possessor being broken by the abundance of thoughts that enters their heart and soul when overusing the Sephiroth Grail. From its power to control the principle of life, the Sephiroth Grail can bring the dead back to life. The Sephiroth Grail can also revive the dead as many times as the user desire, as long as the soul of the deceased remains intact. This power depends on the ability of the user. Side effects. A side effect of the corrosion caused by overusing the Sephiroth Grail is the possessor gaining the ability to talk with and apparently see the dead from the other world. 95% of the users has gone crazy by overusing this sacred gear. When I finished reading this, Draco was a little disappointed. This was very important information, yes, but it was nothing he didn't know beforehand. What he was looking for was confidential information, but he hadn't been able to find anything. It was okay to refresh what he already knew, but Draco expected a lot more. But Valerie's sacred gear was special, not your average Longinus. Throughout DxD, they have seen irregular balance breaker how they can be those that get Issei, Vala Chow Chow, Tobio Accuse, but there are only two sacred gears that are irregular in their most basic form. One of them is Siegfried's twice critical, while the other is none other than Valerie's Sephiroth Grail. The anomaly in Valerie's sacred gear came in the form of 3 grails instead of 1. And it also came with more powerful ones than those usually carried by Longinus. Among them was the ability to remove any creature's weaknesses, although only to a certain extent. Not only that, but it could grant immortality as long as the soul of the target is not damaged. Draco still remembered how Marius Teeps remained alive even after Rius Gremory destroyed 75% of his body with the power of destruction. Of course, Grail couldn't know about all this. After all, anomalies in sacred gears were very rare, and they probably only appeared to give the light novels a thrill. Draco put the documents back in the folder and returned it to Lavinia. Anything else? Draco asked. Lavinia frowned. It's complicated. Valerie's Sephiroth Grail is strange. Draco looked at the damper, who lowered her head as if she had done something wrong, then looked back at Lavinia, feigning ignorance. What do you mean, strange? Draco asked. Valerie, can you show him? Lavinia asked her. She nodded, and just as Draco expected, 3 identical grails appeared on the table. He examined them carefully, trying to uncover the secrets of this one. Draco had always been fascinated by everything about sacred gears. They had a mystery behind them that was very difficult to understand. The God of the Bible was a person Draco had a lot of respect for. A divine being able to take beings, weapons, and souls from other mythologies for his own. How powerful did he have to be to do that? Having known the Greek gods, Draco doubted very much that they would have peacefully accepted that God would take Lycan, for example, to create a weapon, Longinus Canis Lycan, that had the potential to kill them. It was impossible that they would have peacefully accepted this decision. How powerful was this God of the Bible really? Could he have reached the level of Shiva? Draco didn't know, and he wasn't going to give much thought to a dead god either. What he was really giving importance to was DxD's ultimate enemy, Trihexa. The Beast of the Apocalypse, 666, was the most powerful enemy without a doubt, since both Great Red and Ophis could not be considered enemies. They were powerful beings, but were more neutral than anything else. Shiva was the only god who had a power relatively close to that of the Trihexa, and even he had recognized that his power was inferior to that of the beast. If Draco really wanted to get as much experience as possible, he should have at least more than half the power of the Trihexa. This is definitely interesting, Draco said as he watched the 3 grails placed on the table. What do you think? Lavinia asked. Draco leaned over the table as he looked at the 2 girls. I have a theory. Draco flashed a mysterious smile. Have you tried to eliminate weaknesses with the Longinus? I have a theory. Draco flashed a mysterious smile. Have you tried to eliminate weaknesses with the Longinus? Draco looked at the girls with a smile, hoping to get an answer from both of them. Obviously, he knew that Valerie could do that with her Longinus. However, Draco wanted to see their reaction to his words. That's... Lavinia murmured as she frowned. She seemed to be thinking seriously about that idea. It seems a bit far-fetched. That's a skill that's never been used. Draco understood Lavinia's doubts. Having all the data from numerous users of this sacred gear, this was an ability that Sephiroth Graal had never been able to use. Furthermore, the power to reduce the weaknesses of different supernatural beings was something that had never been seen or heard of in this world. What do you think, Valerie? Draco asked the damper. Valerie looked at Draco, a little confused by all that was happening. I don't know. Draco understood why Valerie didn't understand the situation. She was really just a young teenager who knew nothing about her own Longinus, only what little Lavinia had been able to explain to her. She was no different than Tobio and the rest of the teens, and even she was a little worse off than they were because of her own sacred gear situation. Sephiroth Graal is a Longinus known for its ability to control the laws of life and death, something that very few beings in this world can do, and all of them do it in a very limited way. However, it is even better known for having driven the vast majority of its users to madness. Valerie was afraid. Draco could feel it with his senjutsu. In the past, due to experiments, she had already been able to feel the terror of the side effects of this Longinus. The side effects of Sephiroth Graal only manifest themselves when their abilities are used to the extreme, like when trying to resurrect someone. Perhaps they may even manifest themselves before that. That's why we have to treat this sacred gear very carefully, as the last thing we want is for Valerie to get hurt, Draco said. Lavinia nodded. She totally agreed with Draco. Draco took one of the grails and pushed it in front of Valerie. Now, shall we begin? A few hours later, Draco was inside Grigori's buildings. The training with Valerie had gone well, although one could not expect much from the first day either. Valerie was still a little afraid to use her sacred gear in case the side effects showed up again. The young damper had to be given time to adapt and overcome her fears. At least Draco had given Valerie 2 things: determination and hope. I know the location of Gaspar Vladi. Needless to say, what this meant to Valerie. Draco went inside one of Grigori's laboratories. I knew you would be here. Inside the lab was the leader of the fallen angels, Azazel. Dressed in a typical white robe, he was taking notes in a notebook while observing the experiments being conducted here. It has been a while since we last saw each other, Azazel. Draco smiled at him. How have you been? Azazel lifted his head from the papers to look at the newcomer. But look who we have here, Azazel said. The new Great Dragon King has decided to stop by Grigori's facility. Should I be proud? Do what you want, Draco said as he shrugged. Then, he frowned as he understood Azazel's words. How do you know? Don't be so cold, Nephilim dragon, Azazel smiled. You see, there's a certain messenger god who is dedicated to showing off how the new Great Dragon King is affiliated with the Artemis hunt. Since your information network is quite limited, I guess this hasn't reached your ears yet. A god spending his time informing the other factions of this. No doubt this must have been the work of Olympus. Draco was sure that the god who had done this was Hermes, the messenger of Olympus, under orders from Zeus. And he, more or less, understood the reason why they were doing this. The situation in Greek mythology was critical, and they were about to enter into a civil war with the Titans. So, not only were they at their weakest point in the last few millennia, but that was practically public. For, just as Hermes had announced Draco's help, the Titans had done the same by spreading rumors about the easy capture of the goddess Artemis. What do you think of this? Azazel asked. Let them do that, Draco simply said. I warned them at the time. Even though they don't know it, it would have taken me a lot more work to reach this level without their help. Sigh. Despite the warning I gave them, they still think they are superior to others just because they are gods. How ignorant they are, poor creatures trapped in the past. Not all, Azazel denied. There are some of us who know how to change our views over the years. For example, the present Mao's, Michael, and I no longer think we have to continue with the stupid war we waged in the distant past. However, we can't find the right excuse to reach a peace agreement. You'll get it, Draco said. I'm 100% convinced. Oh, how do you know that? Azazel asked. Why? If you can't find that excuse, or rather, if that excuse doesn't come, I will become that excuse. Although I have to say, I can assure you that it will not be easy for you. For a moment, the predatory eyes Draco was giving Azazel managed to scare him. He, a biblical creature, though he would never be afraid of anything in this world. Perhaps not even Ophis or Great Red could do it. However, Azazel prayed to his late father that the day Draco became the enemy of the biblical factions would never come. Meanwhile, Draco looked at the boy who was lying on a stretcher in the same room. How are the tests going? Well, since this never-before-seen transformation of Koga is based on Grigori's technological advances, we can more or less understand exactly how it works. I must say that Satinel's work is a work of art, but it is incomplete. The boy who was being examined in bed was one of the sacred gear owners of the well-known Four Fiends, Koga. Because of the experiments that Satinel had done on his sacred gear, he could use an artificial balance breaker similar to boosted gear or divine dividing. Loss of vitality, isn't it? Azazel nodded his head. It seems that Satinel is in a hurry to achieve satisfactory results, or he doesn't directly think that Koga was his final experiment. Personally, I think it's the latter, knowing his personality. If my suspicions are not mistaken, Shigen Nanadura was his final target. It made sense since Shigen's fiend was known to be the most powerful on a defensive and destructive level. For now, we are still trying to find a way to completely eliminate this loss of vitality. Although with the adjustments we have made, the loss should now be minimal. I see. That's very good, Draco mumbled. I have you to thank for helping my subordinate. Don't mention it, Azazel shook his head. This is being very helpful for us too. What do you mean? By researching Koga's balance breaker, we have made advances in our own quest to create artificial sacred gears. By researching Koga's balance breaker, we have made advances in our own quest to create artificial sacred gears. After saying goodbye to Azazel, Draco began to think seriously about those words that the fallen angel's leader had dropped. Draco knew Azazel's artificial sacred gears very well. The most emblematic of these was the well-known Downfall Dragon Spear, with its balance breaker Downfall Dragon and other armor. The sacred gear that took Fafnir's powers to create a weapon-slash armor in the same way as the boosted gear and the divine dividing. Perhaps, even without Draco's interference, Azazel would have also obtained the information from Koga's sacred gear and its artificial balance breaker. Although maybe not in the same conditions, but that's something Draco can't know. What Draco did not know was if this would speed up the development of Grigori's sacred gears, and how this would affect the plot. Hopefully this hardly mattered. Now, Draco was heading to Grigori's training grounds. Knowing the morning training schedule, Draco knew that they should now be in practice. In other words, combat training. For the young talents to gain fighting experience, Barrakiel had them fight each other daily. Of course, this was nothing compared to the life and death missions and fights they had previously had. Even before he went inside the pavilion, Draco could hear the animated screams coming from the pavilion. Come on, Tobio! Draco could recognize SAE's voice even from such a distance. The shy girl seemed to leave all her shame behind to encourage Slashdog. Come on, Cookie. Try not to lose so hard. Oh, this was Natsum. Although she and Cookie were actually good friends, she found it hard to recognize him. To the point where their everyday conversations used to end in the two of them calling each other names correctly. Shut up, airhead. There was Cookie's answer. It was to be expected, if I am honest. When Draco entered the pavilion, Cookie and Tobio were facing each other. I will show you the fruits of my training, Samajimakun, the young Longinus bearer said as a shadow appeared beside his hand. Without hesitation, He put his hand inside that shadow, from which Tobio extracted a black scythe. With soft, fast, and skillful hand movements, Tobio prepared himself for battle. Apparently, Jean was not going to participate in the battle for some reason unknown to Draco. The dog was next to Essie, cheering Tobio on. They weren't the only ones cheering, as the rest of the boys training in Barakiel's class were watching them. They were Natsum, Issei, Shigyun, Essie, and Akino. Barakiel was also watching the fight closely in case he had to come in and interrupt. "Don't think it's going to be that easy, Tobio. I'll show you how dependent you are on your Longinus," said Cookie as Byakusa climbed onto his shoulder. It was ironic that Cookie said that Tobio was dependent on his sacred gear, which was true, when he literally needed his electric cat to climb on his shoulder to be slightly effective. But that's not something we're going to discuss now. Byakusa's two tails were wrapped around Byakusa's arm, and then rolled together to form a spear that was thicker and more powerful than it used to be. By using the two tails to form the spear instead of just one, Draco could see that the weapon gained a lot of consistency and seemed to be more effective. However, in return, Cookie lost the confidence he gained from having Byakusa defend his back from any surprise attack, and he lost the offensive capability of having two spears attacking from different distances at the same time. Perhaps they had reached an agreement to fight only with the scythe and the spear, thus confronting their abilities with the respective weapons. In Draco's opinion, the pressure that Cookie could put on his adversary was greater when Byakusa controlled one of the tails to attack. And when Tobio fought with Jean, they were a very lethal couple. Barakiel blew his whistle, starting the fight, and both boys ran towards each other. Some might doubt if this was really a training match. Personally, Draco was amazed at the boys' improvement. Tobio's handling of the scythe was extraordinary. His movements, both with the weapon and the body, were bordering on perfection. No one who didn't know Tobio would say that he had only been training with his scythe for a few months. It was worth saying that, just like Chow Chow with the spear, Tobio was born to carry a scythe in his hand. And while it was true that Tobio was the dominant offensive player, Cookie's reasoning and reflexes were also admirable, as was his skill with the spear. He was an innate fighter, capable of intuiting any of Tobio's attacks, blocking them successfully. Such was Cookie's ability, that he counterattacked at key moments, interrupting Tobio's rhythm little by little. In a real battle, there was no way Cookie could use this strategy to fight Tobio, not if it was a battle to the death. The reason for this was none other than the difference in level between the two sacred gears. If Tobio really wants to, he can cut off Byakusa's tails with ease. This was one of the properties that made Canis Lycaon so powerful, the ability to cut anything its user wanted. Tobio and Cookie continued to exchange blows at very high speeds. Barakiel's physical training was showing, bringing out the full potential of both teens' physiques. Draco didn't have to watch anything else. They were ready to actively participate in missions. "It looks like Barakiel is doing a good job," Draco said as he casually approached the other boys. "Tobio and Cookie have improved a lot. Draco and I." Issei greeted him as he looked on. Akino rushed to his side without saying anything and hugged his arm. She seemed to be in a hurry and didn't want anyone to take her place next to Draco. The dragon smiled and stroked the young woman's head. "They have been training very hard," Natsum said. "This is the fruit of their labor." Much. Draco was not surprised to see Shigen and her fiend, called Pokuin, eating. Meanwhile, Sai watched the figure of Tobio fighting with bright eyes. "What about you?" Draco asked. "Have you improved?" Natsum smiled. "Yes, but not as much as the two of them. I don't doubt that they were born for this. And you, Issei?" A bold smile appeared on Issei's face. "I can use boost 3 times now. With more training, I'm sure I could become incredibly strong." Draco nodded. "That's right. Not for nothing is your sacred gear a Longinus. Above all, you have to train your stamina and physical ability as you search through the mysteries of your sacred gear. The more developed your body is, the more boosts you can use and the longer your balance breaker will last once you get it unlocked. You have to work hard." "Yes, Draco and I." Then, Draco looked at the girl who was holding his arm. Akino. She didn't say anything, but 3 pairs of wings came out of her back. This completely surprised Draco, as he understood what these wings meant. He never would have expected her to improve her power so quickly, rising to AT3. Well, logic didn't make sense in this world, so you didn't have to think too hard either. The question was, how was Rainier going to accept that Akino had already gotten her third pair of wings when she was barely getting her second? By the way, where is Nico? Dawn's newest member, son of Hades. He should be training here with the rest of Dawn's teenagers. It was Natsum who answered that question. Zoe has taken him away. They should be training with Chiron and Mordred. Is that so? I guess I'll go check it out. Draco said goodbye to the boys after watching Tobio and Cookie fight for a few more seconds. Now he was going to see how Chiron and Nico were doing. Draco was really curious about how the two kids had developed their skills. After watching part of the battle between Tobio and Cookie, Draco returned home again. Draco's intention was to observe Nico's improvements at Grigori and then see how Chiron had improved with Mordred's training. However, there was a small problem, as neither of them was at Grigori. As Natsum had told Draco, it seemed that after giving the morning theory classes, Zoe had brought Nico to the residence to do joint training with Mordred and Chiron. Draco soon arrived using the teleportation circles that connected the two locations. I really should learn how to create these magical circles, Draco reflected as he used them. Previously, Draco had not bothered to learn how to use them because he lacked sufficient magical power. And, naturally, this was no longer the case. It had been several months since Draco had evolved into a Dragon King, and he might have been able to use them since he was a dragon. Fortunately, Draco hadn't needed to use these teleportation circles for anything other than going to Grigori. However, now he could put them to good use with his possible future trips to the US. He could even use them to get home from anywhere, so this magic was very convenient. Once he arrived home, Draco looked for the three girls' presents and the boy he was looking for. Interestingly, they were in the room next to the one he had used to investigate the Sephiroth Grail with Lavinia and Valerie. Upon entering, they seemed to be in the midst of a break. "You must be careful how you use your powers, Nico," Zoe was saying to the 10-year-old. "It can't be that every time you use them, you end up this exhausted." The boy in question, Nico D'Angelo, was lying on the floor. He was pale, paler than usual, although that was something to expect from a son of Hades. As Draco could deduce from Zoe's words, this extreme pallor stemmed from the overuse of skills on the boy's part. A pity, since it seems that Draco was not going to be able to see how Nico had improved after all these weeks. He really wanted to see the fruits of the young demigod's training. With a quick inspect status, Draco could see that Nico's MP had indeed reached 0. This was something really dangerous, which Draco had more than once experienced. Being a dragon, Draco had always been able to resist it with relative ease. However, Nico was a fragile child who was just beginning to understand what it meant to be a demigod. Nico was still a human. On the other hand, Chiron was drinking water from a bottle that Mordred had given her. Unlike Nico, she was barely sweating. "Master!" Mordred shouted when she noticed Draco's presence. "Hello!" Draco greeted everyone in the room. "Draco!" Nico tried to get up from the ground, but Zoe stopped him on the floor. "Don't get up yet. Rest for a while." Chiron did approach Draco, wagging her only tail as she joyfully walked towards the dragon. "Nisama, what are you doing here?" Chiron asked with a smile, obviously happy for Draco's presence. "I had intended to watch you both train, to see how much you had improved." Draco could hear a whimper from Nico, and Zoe had to keep him on the floor to force him to stop moving. "As far as I can see, Nico, you're in no condition to continue training." "Yes, I can." Once again, Nico tried to get up, but Zoe had him well secured. "Calm down. Even if you try, you won't be able to use a drop of magic," Draco said. Disappointment could be seen on the face of Nico, who wanted to show Draco all that he had achieved in his training, both at Grigori and with Zoe. But this didn't seem to be his day, and he was going to have to wait for another day to show Draco his improvement. "Sigh. You're too impulsive," Zoe couldn't help but sigh. "Well, it's not bad to be impulsive," Draco said. "Being willing to get better is the most important thing when you're training, the first step you have to take. The fruits of your effort may take a little while to come, but they will come." I can assure you of that. Draco's words didn't just reach Nico, who Draco was addressing, but they also reached Chiron, Mordred, and Zoe. Chiron was in a similar state to Nico, although she had been training for over 2 years. She still had a lot to grow and mature, so she could gradually approach the level of her Ne-sama and Ni-sama. Or at least that was her goal. Zoe and Mordred were already very strong. Their effort had already shown results. Before becoming the servants of Draco, they were among the most powerful of their respective generations. Mordred was the young talent at the Round Table, while Zoe was the most powerful hunter. These words from Draco reminded them of all the effort they had had to make to reach these places before they met Draco. Leaving Nico aside, Draco focused on Chiron. He hadn't noticed it before, as Chiron hadn't had it in her hand before. In fact, he had never seen it before. I'm talking about the 2-meter-long great sword that was leaning against the wall. This obviously did not belong to Mordred, since she was using Clarent, nor did it belong to Zoe or Nico, since neither of them used this kind of weapon. I doubt that Nico could even lift it. So without a doubt, this sword belonged to Chiron. Moving away from Chiron, Draco took the weapon in his hands. "Ah, Ni-sama!" Chiron exclaimed as she saw Draco take the weapon. "Is this yours? It's pretty heavy. Can you really use this great sword?" Draco asked out of curiosity. In fact, the great sword was quite heavy. This one should weigh a lot more than Chiron, so it was not uncommon for Draco to think this was too much for a girl of just 12 to 13 years old. However, of course, Chiron approached Draco and easily snatched the sword from him. Although she had to hold the sword in 2 hands, it was a sword that was designed to be used like this from the start. Chiron had almost no difficulty lifting it. That was her natural strength, the same one that caught Rias Gremory's attention and decided that the crimson-haired princess should use a piece of rook for Chiron. Although she still had some difficulty carrying the sword, it was something incredible that she could use a weapon that was 2 or 3 feet bigger than her. "Look, Ni-sama!" Chiron screamed as a white aura began to surround her. Yes, how could Draco have forgotten? Chiron was a Nekashu. Making use of Senjutsu was easy for her, like breathing or walking. With the use of Tuki, she had no problem using such a large sword. Draco looked at Mordred and asked, "That sword is of good quality. Where did you get it?" "The Pendragon family is very rich," Mordred said as she shrugged. Basically, she had taken advantage of her descendants once again. Draco smiled as he looked at Chiron. A light shone on his right hand, and Levitian appeared. "Well, Chiron, why don't you show me how much you've improved over the years?" "You are too strong, Ni-sama," Chiron said between heavy breaths. "Even after all this training, I can't even hit you properly." The youngest of the Nekashu sisters rested on her great sword, looking terribly exhausted. Draco had not attacked once, but had dedicated himself to defending each and every one of Chiron's attacks. It made no sense for him to attack, as Chiron would obviously not be able to defend herself. Draco only wanted to see how much Chiron had improved, so defeating her made no sense at all. And so, Draco more or less got used to the idea of Chiron's fighting power. Stats aren't everything. And she's stronger than Draco expected. Chiron was not at the level of Tobio or Cookie in terms of fighting power, but she might not lose to Natsum. Depending on the circumstances, Chiron cannot defeat the true form of Natsum's sacred gear. Her skill with the sword was similar to that of Mordred. It was not a conventional style, but it was one that worked perfectly for Chiron. Like her teacher, the Nekashu did not hesitate to throw her weapon away in order to gain an advantage over her opponent. Since her melee skills were not inferior to her greatsword ability, along with the great power in her Tuki-enhanced body, she was able to use this surprise attack tactic quite effectively. "I am a great dragon king. In theory, there are only 9 living dragons that are stronger than me," Draco said as she stroked Chiron's head. "In practice, I think only 4 of them can really defeat me in a fight. Don't worry about not being able to beat me right now. You still have a lot of growing up to do." Of the 6 original Dragon Kings, Vritra is sealed in numerous sacred gears, so only Tannen, Fafnir, Yulong, and Tiamat are theoretically stronger or at the same level as Draco. In practice, Draco could most likely defeat them all. The unknown Tiamat is an exception, since her real powers are unknown. Of the evil dragons, only Krumkruch and Niger are still alive, even if the rest of the world thinks they are still dead. In theory, the evil dragons are more powerful than the great dragon kings, but Draco was already able to kill Layden. Therefore, Niger shouldn't be a problem either now that his strength has increased so much after killing the Greek evil dragon. Krumkruch and Tiamat, along with Great Red and Ophis, are the only dragons that are actually more powerful than Draco and could defeat him in battle. Of course, if Draco manages to release more Levitian seals, only Great Red and Ophis may become stronger than him. The same goes for 90% of the gods. Perhaps only the Hindu gods, along with some loose god from another pantheon, can actually defeat, or at least not lose, a battle against the current Draco. Zeus with his definitive bolt, Poseidon with his trident, Hades, Thor with his legendary weapons, Odin with his spear, Shiva, Brahma, Indra are a luff. They are the most powerful gods in every pantheon, but until Draco faces them, he will not know what the real difference in power is between them. At that moment, Draco felt a presence appear in front of his house. Speaking of gods, the next day, Draco gathered his 3 servants. He had called them together for something important, though they were waiting for this day. Facing Draco were the 3. Zoe on the left, Mordred on the right, and Kuroka in the center. Archer, Saber, and Caster. Draco already had 3 of the 7 conventional classes at his disposal. "I think you all know why I have gathered you here," Draco said. "But I'm going to say it anyway. I've given you a few days to spend quality time with the people you trust the most or think you'll miss the most. Zoe, I gave you the opportunity to go back to Artemis for a few days, but you turned it down. I've been living with Artemis for millennia on a day-to-day basis. Spending a few more days with her will only increase my reluctance to work with you," she said candidly. "I understand," Draco nodded. "As you know, we are going to travel to another world where the Holy Grail Wars are celebrated. As I have explained to you several times, these are wars in which usually 7 masters fight alongside 7 servants," Draco summarized briefly. "Our aim this time is not the Holy Grail, for it is corrupt, but to kill as many servants as possible, for then we will become stronger, and we need that strength." "Draco, you are already so powerful. Why do you want more strength?" Kuroka asked. "In a few years, very powerful enemies will come, some even at the level of Great Red and Ophis. When those enemies come, we need the strength to finish them off, or we will be the ones to die. Can't we just avoid them?" Mordred asked. Draco shook his head. "I'm their target. The chosen one of the Order. Draco was the enemy that Chaos wanted to eradicate. Although Draco didn't really care that the Chaos did what it wanted for the multiverse, they're going to go for his life. A good example of this is the weak explorer they sent 3 years ago, who was helping with the experiments in Kuroka. From what the old man told him at the time, he was among the weakest of the weak, and there were hundreds of thousands of them, even millions. Those numbers were terrifying. Millions of T3 were capable of provoking a crisis in this world if they really decided to invade with all their power. And then there were also the really powerful, the real powers. Could this world resist them? Of course not. They could barely cope with the bad guys of this world. How could they defend themselves from the outside world? "That's a problem," Zoe said. The 3 servants understood the gravity of the situation. Even with powers on the level of Great Red and Ophis, Draco sensed that they would not be enough to save this world. Someone had to step forward. "Opening a portal to Nasaverse. I need specs." Sage's voice sounded in Draco's head. He had already started the preparations. Fate/Zero Unlimited Blade Works Universe. Year 1993. Fuyuki. Data successfully obtained. Using a fate point, preparing portal. A few seconds later, the atmosphere became turbulent. Before the astonished glances of the servants, a black hole opened up in front of Draco, positioning itself between him and the 3 girls. Portal successfully created. I remind you that only you and the servants can use this portal. Once you cross it, time in this world will stop. Perfect. Draco looked at the girls and said, "Come in." They seemed to hesitate a bit, but finally they trusted Draco. Mordred was the first, entering with determination and confidence. This was going to be an important place for her, Draco had said it many times, and she trusted him. Zoe followed her. From the moment she entered the portal, all doubts she had about being Draco's servant were over. She had already made up her mind, and she was not going to back down. Kariya had the most doubts. She understood that, by crossing that portal, she was going to leave her sister behind for 10 years. When she returned from that world, she would not be the same person she was before, while Chiron would continue to be the same innocent little girl. But one look into Draco's serious eyes was enough to give her courage. Kariya knew that Draco was leaving behind much more than a sister, but a whole family that he had created with effort and patience. If he could take that step forward, why couldn't she? When Draco saw that all the girls had come in, he did the same. At that moment, Sage spoke in his head again. Your power and that of your servants is greater than the difficulty of this world. I know. I can increase the difficulty of this world. Don't worry. I won't increase it to the point that you can't overcome. It's just so you don't feel like you've wasted your time. What do you give me in return? Twice the experience for each kill. Draco did not hesitate. Do it. Draco was confident in his abilities. So, what if the difficulty increased? With the new weapon Aphrodite had given him, there was no way he would not overcome this world. Fuyuki, 1993. The main reason for Draco to choose Fuyuki was obvious, as it is the setting for Fate/Zero and Fate/Stay Night. Fuyuki is separated into two sections by the River Mayan that can be considered two towns, Shinto and Miyama Town, which are the new and old sections of the city respectively. While not based directly on a real city, many of the locations are based on those located in Kobe. Miyama Town is the suburban area of Fuyuki that contains old houses and traditional buildings. It can be split into two main parts, the traditional Japanese houses district and the foreigners' houses district. The road to Hamurahara Academy, where Shiro Amiya and Tosaka Rin studies, is set between the two districts. The Matu and Tosaka residences are located in the foreigners' district, while Shiro's and the Fujimura's houses are in the traditional district. Shinto is the newer district of Fuyuki that is under development east of the Mayan River. Around the 1990s, the area was reclaimed from a previously empty wasteland, beginning a large-scale redevelopment project funded by the local government to build a modern business district containing features like a park and shopping mall in front of the train station. The city hall being moved from Miyama to give it a more modern structure, and the maintenance of the park and shopping mall were complete. Although the buildings are only 40% complete right now, it is constantly crowed during holidays. The purpose for it was to be a clean and sterile area that would be pompous and contain no individuality, but is going to suffer a major setback after the Fourth Holy Grail War, when the advent and destruction of the Holy Grail caused a conflagration that destroyed 134 buildings and claimed 500 lives after burning for an entire day. Much of the city was rebuilt over the next 10 years, rapidly developing with tall buildings over the destroyed land. Between these two areas, Draco decided to settle in Foreigners District, and he had his reasons for doing so. The main reason was that there was still 1 year left for the war to start, and from this place he could monitor the movements of the Tosaka and Matu families. Above all, he was waiting for the fateful day that should happen at any moment. But, most importantly, how had they settled in if they had no money? One cannot underestimate the powers of a caster like Kariya. In short, one can say that Draco was being financed by several banks with a lot of money. Draco didn't know what changes Sage had introduced to this world, but if nothing had changed from the original story, he could more or less get an idea of what events had already happened. In 1986, 7 years ago, Ilyasville von Einsborn was born. Karitsugu Amiya had already joined the Einsborn family a long time ago. Draco was especially interested in Irisville von Einsborn, and although her death is totally necessary in the anime, Draco is interested in saving her and potentially turning her into a servant. In practice, spending a fate point on Irisville is not worthwhile at all. However, just as he did with Kariya, Draco wants to do it out of his own feelings for the Irisville character. Of course, if she does not want to become a servant, Draco cannot force her. The same thing happened with Zoe before. The same goes for Ilyasville. Draco was one of those people who really wanted to see a route where Ilya was the only female protagonist, since in visual novel, she was always a secondary character. In 1990, 3 years ago, Kodomine Kariya, Kodomine Rise, and Tosaka Tokiomi reached an agreement for the Holy Grail War. Although this really doesn't matter to Draco, since the only thing that worries them is Tokiomi's servant. And the next event should happen any day now. A few days later, Draco was sitting on the couch in his new home in the living room, reflecting on his next moves. If the difficulty had indeed increased, Draco had to carefully prepare his next steps. The living room door opened, and Mordred walked in. "Master, I have news," she said earnestly. "Mata Kariya has booked a flight to Japan. When will he arrive?" Draco asked seriously. "In 4 days," Mordred replied. "I see, so it's tomorrow." There was a character in Fate that was not liked by many people, or who was always left behind when it came to deciding who was the best Fate heroine. This is not other one that Matu Sakura or Sakura Matu. Nevertheless, Draco thought that she was an undervalued character. The potential of Sakura is exploited above all in her route, Heaven's Feel. The mind of the girl is so corrupt that it causes a destruction not inferior to that which occurs at the end of Fourth Holy Grail War. And tomorrow was the most important day in the life of Sakura. According to the information that Draco had, of having read the LN of Fate/Zero and of the own anime, Sakura is delivered to the Matus 3 days before Kariya arrived from her trip of 3 months. That's why Draco had been so attentive to the registration of flights in the airport of Fuyuki. The return of Kariya was key for Draco to know the exact day in which Sakura left the Tosaka family. Draco knew a lot about Sakura, and he knew that she had much more potential than Zoken manages to squeeze from her. The Tosaka sisters, together with another very special person that Draco had his eye on, were the only humans that deserved that Draco spent a fate point. Irisveal and Ilia are not human. They are homunculi. "I'm not going to be home tomorrow. I have work to do," Draco told Mordred. "It's the perfect time to make my first public appearance in this world." The day began like any other day, but this was not a normal day for the Tosaka family. Aoi Tosaka, formerly known as Aoi Zenju, knew this very well. Today was not exactly a happy day for her, far from it. Today was the day she was going to lose a daughter. Aoi, obviously, did not want to lose Sakura. However, she never expressed her rejection to the decision that Tokiomi, her husband, had made. Aoi knew what it meant to marry a magus, and these were the consequences. As Tokiomi had explained to Aoi, the Matu family had problems with their descendants. Around 200 years ago, the Matu, they were called Makiri before, began to decline, and their offspring started to lose their capacity to manifest magic circuits. Their fall finally culminated in their last heir, Shinji Matu, having no magic circuits at all. The last known member of the Matu who was born with magic circuits was a friend of Aoi, Kariya Matu. However, he never pursued the path of a magus. With the practice of passing down their magic crest among the family members being ceased since generations before, everything that is now left of their mystic heritage is simply knowledge in the form of books of magecraft. Their only choice to continue with their line would be to take in pupils from other families. But because of their history of being overly prideful, nobody would willingly go to them. That in mind, Zoken Matu went to the Tosaka while recalling the past pact of friendship between the two families. As a result, Sakura Tosaka was getting adopted into the Matu. Rin watched as her father, Tokiomi Tosaka, and her mother, Aoi Tosaka, left with her younger sister, Sakura Tosaka. She knew the reason why Sakura was going to be adopted. Her father had explained it to her. Both Rin and Sakura had been born with a supernatural talent for magecraft. This should be something that any family of magicians should be happy about. Unfortunately, this is not the case with the Tosaka family, and this is because only one person can inherit the family crest. Tokiomi had to make the decision to choose her heir, and that had been the eldest daughter, Rin Tosaka. This meant that, following the laws of the family, something Tokiomi had always followed and would continue to do so, Sakura could not receive any magical education. And for Tokiomi, that was a waste. When Zoken Matu arrived at the residence, Tokiomi saw hope for her youngest daughter. If she went to the Matu, her potential as a magus would not be wasted. That is why he easily agreed to Zoken's request. He had not explained this to Aoi, but to Rin. As the future head of the Tosaka house, Rin had to know all this. It was part of her education as a magus. Rin understood what her father meant, but she didn't accept it, she didn't agree. Why couldn't Tokiomi train both of them? Why did Sakura have to go to another family? Why could Rin no longer consider Sakura as her sister? Rin observed from the window how her father took her younger sister. From this moment, Rin was the only daughter of Tokiomi and Aoi. "Goodbye, Sakura," Rin said goodbye from the distance. Rin was a strong girl, but she was unable to stop her tears from coming out of her eyes. "Today is the day I am going to kidnap a 5-year-old girl." Draco felt that something was wrong with his words. "Why do I feel like I'm a pedophile?" Draco was sitting on the couch in his house, and next to him were Mordred and Kuroka. "You have to save that girl, Draco," Kuroka said softly as she caressed Draco's chest. Draco had told the girls the history of Sakura, without reserving anything. Since she was adopted by the Matu, brutally raped by thousands of worms, and forced to live with them in her insides for more than 10 years. Without forgetting the rapes of Shinji Matu, and all the history behind Dark Sakura. Zoe had no qualms about insulting the men once again by allowing something like this to happen, and Draco had no argument to deny it. She was right. All the men involved in Sakura Tosaka's life were trash. She became so attached to Shiro Amiya because he was the first man to show her some affection in her life. Kuroka could not stop thinking that Sakura and her looked alike. However, what Sakura was going to suffer if Draco did not save her was much worse than what Kuroka was ever going to suffer. That is why she wanted Draco to save the girl. "If you don't save that girl, I won't forgive you," said Mordred. Mordred. She wanted to go and kill all the Matu at the same moment in which she heard the story of Sakura. Fortunately, Draco managed to stop her and to convince her not to do it. He already had something in mind and did not want that Mordred sent to the shit all his plans. Sakura Tosaka and Tokiomi Tosaka have already left the Tosaka residence. Zoe sent a message to Draco. Draco had sent her to watch over the Tosaka family, as the archers have improved vision. "Well," Draco stood up. "If all goes well, I'll be back in 30 minutes with the girl." Draco, feeling his connection to Zoe, quickly arrived at his position. Draco had chosen his home somewhere between the Tosaka residence and the Matu residence because of this very situation. Just a few minutes later, Draco caught up with Zoe. She was following a black luxury vehicle, Tokiomi Tosaka's official car. "Zoe," Draco called her. "Draco," she nodded as they continued to run behind the car. Tokiomi Tosaka and the girl are the only ones inside the car. "I know." Using Senjutsu, Draco could feel the presence of 2 people inside the car. It was not very complicated to deduce that they were Tokiomi and Sakura. The car stopped at the doors of the Matu residence. The Matu residence is quite large and is quite well known in the area next to the Tosaka residence. Tokiomi parked the car, and the 2 got out of it. At the door of the Matu residence, there was already the old Zoken waiting for Sakura with a 5 or 6-year-old boy, Shinji Matu. Draco and Zoe did not act immediately, but they waited for Tokiomi to give Sakura and to leave the place. Once Tokiomi left, Zoken approached Sakura. "From now on you are Sakura Matu. Your relationship with the Tosaka no longer exists." The old decrepit smiled wickedly. The small Sakura trembled, but she limited herself to nod. The smile of Zoken increased when seeing this, and he approached to caress the head of the girl. "Do not touch it, worm." A strong hand grabbed Zoken's arm, and he was surprised. When had this boy appeared? Draco had already moved by the time Zoken had spoken. He was not going to let the old man touch Sakura. "It burns!" Zoken shouted when he felt the burning heat that Draco's arm carried. "Sakura, come with me." Zoe appeared from behind and hugged the girl. A couple of jumps, and the girls had already disappeared. Draco felt how Zoken's arm was melting, although in fact, it was that he had killed the worms that were making of the arm. Zoken's body had stopped being human a long time ago, and now it was completely made up of worms. These were the ones that kept him alive. "I would kill you, Zaldjian Makiri, but it is not so easy to kill a 500-year-old dog. For now, I'm going to leave you alive, until I find that worm." After saying those words, Draco disappeared, leaving Zoken and Shinji in shock. How does he know that? That was all Zoken could think about. He no longer cared about losing Sakura. He was now afraid for her life. Even if his body is destroyed, he can always form a new one. But if that worm is destroyed, Zoken Matu will disappear of the face of the earth. What's going on? That was what Sakura asked herself in these moments. Today was an important day in her life, although that did not mean that it was a happy day. Her father. Well, he was no longer her father. Tokiomi Tosaka had explained to her that she was no longer part of the family and was going to give her to the Matu. They were going to raise her as their descendant and teach her magic. But she didn't want to learn magic if it meant abandoning her family. But neither her mother nor her sister had defended her or expressed their rejection of the decision Tokiomi had made. Her entire family had abandoned her. Sakura had been mentalized of that. Now, she had to start a new life in an unknown house. Tokiomi had accompanied her to the Matu's house, and she was just a step away from the old Zoken. However, why was she in a totally different house? And why was there a girl doing kitsune cosplay in front of her? "Master, good job." Sakura directed her attention to the blonde girl, which looked strangely innocent to the eyes of the innocent Sakura. "You are a very pretty girl, yeah." The girl that seemed to be doing cat cosplay bent down in front of Sakura. It was inevitable that the vision of the small Tosaka went to that pair of mountains that bounced for the own movement of the girl. She caressed the head of Sakura with smoothness while she gave her a kind smile. That smile inevitably relaxed immediately the anxiety that Sakura was feeling, filling her with heat inside. Any person would feel a minimum of stress if they are suddenly kidnapped by strangers. The situation is even more complicated for a 5-year-old girl like Sakura. Still, I thought that everything was going to be more complicated. Rescuing the girl has been surprisingly easy. The one that had spoken was the third of the girls. She had been the one that had taken Sakura and had taken her to this house. The three were very different girls, being that the first one was a girl with Western features, the girl doing cosplay was obviously Japanese, and the third one seemed a girl coming from the Middle East. Old Zoken didn't expect this attack, so he let us go easily. I also intimidated him quite a bit. Revealing his weakness must have been a shock to him. The one who had spoken now was the only boy present. For the form that he spoke, and seeing how the girls surrounded him unconsciously, Sakura could suppose that he was the leader. It was him who had faced the old Zoken, while the other girl kidnapped her. One should not underestimate the Zoken, since he is one of the few alive humans that can face a servant. No, he is the only one who has the power to do so at this time, or so I believe. Aoko Aozuki should be the other human able to face a servant and win, but Draco did not know if she had already acquired the fifth magic or not. And Zelrich is not directly human. Still, Draco had no intention of getting involved with Blue or Zelrich at this point. They were too much trouble, especially the vampire. While Blue is troubled by the fact that he can be a tough competitor in battle, Zelrich is troubled by being Zelrich. And Zoken is also a troubled opponent. Not only is he the most knowledgeable person about the Holy Grail, having been one of its 3 creators, but he is literally immortal. It has been centuries since Zoken ceased to be human, becoming a wraith while hiding it through the family records. His worms are responsible for giving him a physical body, so he will not die until they all disappear. Everything would be much less problematic if Draco had an attack that could damage a disembodied soul. But not even the Tuki can do that since he attacks the life force and a wraith lacks that. And I'm most likely wrong about this. I will investigate further. By the way, the boy approached Sakura and lowered his head to her height. "My name is Draco, delighted of knowing you. I am Zoe, Mordred, and I am Kurokanya." All presented themselves in front of Sakura, giving beginning to a new stage in her life. Shit. The old Matu patriarch, Zoken, was walking around his training room. Everything he had planned was going perfectly. Everything. Once Sakura arrived at the house of the Matu, Zoken was going to train her so that she became an excellent magician for the family. Their worms were going to prepare her to be an excellent mother for the next head of family. In this way, the Matu were going to retake their line of magicians. But now, all those plans had gone to waste. Zoken had no plans to participate in this war, as he had no trained descendants. However, it seemed that now there was going to be a change of plan. The Matu were going to disappear if Zoken didn't do something. It seemed that he was going to have to participate in this war himself, something he had never planned to do. Damn you! Zoken could only curse the man who had stolen from the Tosaka girl. Thinking coldly, Zoken could say that this boy was not human. He had an aura that Zoken had never felt. But no matter what, Zoken was going to accomplish his goals no matter what, as he had always done. He immediately recognized the woman he was looking for. Early in the afternoon in the middle of the vacation, one can see the children playing in the land bathed in the peaceful sunlight of early autumn, with their parents looking after them in the distance, always smiling. The square around the park's fountain was full of people from the village who had brought their families to relax for a moment. Even in such a crowd, he did not lose his way. No matter how crowded it was, no matter how far away, he was sure he could find it without any effort. Even if he didn't know if he could see her even once a month, even if she already had a partner. Only when he walked up to her did the woman under the shade of the trees notice his arrival. Hey, it's been a long time since we've seen each other. Oh, Kariya, showing a modest and polite smile, she looked up from the book she was reading. Tired. Seeing her that way, Kariya felt trapped by anxiety. Something seemed to be tormenting her. He immediately wanted to ask what was the cause of that problem, to force himself to find a solution to that something. But Kariya could not even mention it even though he was guided by that impulse. He was not close enough to show such unreserved affection. That was not his position. It has been 3 months. The journey has really been long this time. Yes. Surely her smile would appear in his sweetest dreams. But he does not have the courage to face it when it is really before him. It has been like this for the last 8 years, and Kariya will probably never be able to face that smile until the end of his days. This is because she makes him so nervous, so much so that he never knows what to say after the two have greeted each other, and a subtle silence makes its appearance. That happens every time too. To break the uncomfortable silence, Kariya looked for the person with whom he could always talk easily. There, playing among the other children on the grass, the 2 pigtails were moving happily. Although she was still very young, the girl was already showing signs of the beautiful face she had inherited from her mother. Rin-chan, Kariya called out to her, waving her hand. As soon as she noticed it, the girl named Rin rushed towards him with a bright smile. Welcome, Uncle Kariya. Did you bring me another gift? Rin, mind your manners. The young girl did not seem to notice her mother's embarrassed voice. Rin's eyes shone with expectation. Kariya, responding with the same smile, showed one of the 2 gifts she was carrying behind her back. Wow, beautiful. An elaborate brooch made of glass beads of various sizes captured the girl's heart at first sight. Although it seemed too much for a girl of her age, Kariya was well aware of Rin's precocious tastes. Uncle, I thank you as always. I will take good care of it. Haha, as long as you like it, your uncle will be happy too. Gently stroking Rin's head, Kariya sought out the recipient of the other gift he had brought. For some reason, she was nowhere to be found in the park. Where is Sakura-chan? Hearing Kariya's question, Rin's smile immediately faded. Her face looked as if she had totally stopped thinking, the face of a child resigned to accept reality without thinking. Sakura, she has already left. With an inexpressive face, Rin gave an answer in a monotonous tone. Then, as if she wanted to avoid Kariya's questions, she ran back to the children she was playing with a few moments ago. Surprised by Rin's incomprehensible words, Kariya looked at Rin's mother inquisitively without realizing it. She averted her eyes from the empty spot with a sad face. What does that mean? Sakura is no longer my daughter, nor Rin's sister. Her tone was rough, but stronger than her daughter Rin's. That girl, she has gone to the Matu family. Matu. The name, sounding so deeply familiar and yet abominable, ripped out Kariya's heart violently. That can't. What the hell does that mean? I always say, or that should have happened. However, there was an accident. Even Rin doesn't know about this, and I don't want her to know. Kariya's heart was beating violently. The little Sakura-chan, what could have happened? Aoi Tosaka, who had remained cold since Kariya had seen her, could no longer keep calm. Her body was shaking violently. Her face was paler than normal, and her lips were purple. Aoi-san? Sakura has been kidnapped. Aoi's words destroyed Kariya. The little Sakura, that happy and shy girl at the same time that always enjoyed playing with her older sister. Had she been kidnapped? They waited for Tokiomi to deliver Sakura and to leave the place to snatch her from the hands of the Matu. Aoi explained to her. Are you all right, Aoi-san? Kariya asked. Kariya was very worried about Sakura, but he was also worried about Aoi. Being the mother of the child, she should be dying inside because of the anxiety. I am worried, but she is not my daughter, Aoi said coldly. That's what Tokiomi said. It's up to the Matu to rescue her daughter. Aoi's cold response sank Kariya. Do you agree with that? I was prepared for something like that when I decided to marry someone from the family Tosaka, when I decided to become a Magus's wife. When one enters the bloodline of a Magus, it is a mistake to seek the happiness of a normal family. And, facing Kariya, who seemed to want to speak again, the Magus's wife, gently but clearly, stopped him. This is a matter between the Tosaka and the Matu. This does not concern you, who have turned your back on the world of the Magus. She finished that sentence by nodding slightly. With this, Kariya could no longer move. As if he had transformed herself into one of the trees in the park, he felt his chest drowning with weakness and helplessness. If you are able to see Sakura ever, please treat her with love. She has always loved you, Kariya-kun. With Aoi looking after her, Rin was playing brightly, full of energy, as if trying to chase away her pain. As if Rin's behavior was the answer that pushed Kariya to her side, Tosaka Aoi was only showing the profile of a peaceful mother in the middle of her vacation. But even so, Kariya did not fail to notice. There was no way that he could not notice. The firm and serene Tosaka Aoi, who had accepted her destiny. She was not even able to hide the tears that were gathering in her eyes. Kariya hurried across the stage of his homeland, which he thought he would never see again. Every time he returned to Fuyuki City, he never crossed the bridge to Miyama. 10 years have passed since then. Unlike the Shinto area, where business was conducted every day, nothing had changed in this neighborhood where time seemed to have stopped. The quiet streets were full of memories. But none of the pleasures would come to him if he stopped to look. Ignoring such useless nostalgia, Kariya thought about his conversation with Aoi an hour ago. Do you agree with it? The unexpected pardon Aoi threw at him as he looked away from him. He had not used such a harsh tone in many years. Don't look up. Don't be a nuisance. This was how he had lived. Anger, hatred. Kariya had left everything in the desolate streets of Miyama. After getting rid of his hometown, Kariya had never made a fuss about anything. Even the most horrible of affairs was nothing compared to what he had hated in this land. That is why, yes, it must have been 8 years since his voice carried such feelings. On that occasion, was it not with the same woman that Kariya had used the same tone, the same words? Do you agree with it? He asked the same question on that occasion. He turned to his childhood friend the night before she received the name Tosaka. He never forgot it, the expression she was wearing at the time. She had nodded slightly, as if asking for forgiveness, though she was still blushing with grief. Kariya had been defeated by that silent smile. I was already prepared. It is a mistake to seek the joy of a normal family. Such words were a lie. That day, 8 years ago, when a young magician asked her to marry him, her smile definitely showed her faith in finding happiness. And so, Kariya completely accepted his defeat because he believed in that smile. Perhaps the man who would marry Aoi, that man was the only one who could make her happy. But that was a mistake. More than anyone else in the world, Kariya must have realized that fatal mistake. Because he had already fully realized how despicable magic was. Had he not rejected his destiny and abandoned his family? No matter, he could forgive that. Even he, who had turned his back on it out of fear, well aware of how abominable sorcery really was. The woman who was most important to him had surrendered, of all people, to the man who was closest to the word Magus. What now burns in Kariya's chest is guilt. Not just once, but twice, he had chosen the wrong words. He should not have asked, "Do you agree with it?" but should have concluded, "You must not do that." And 8 years ago, if he had stopped Aoi, maybe there would have been a different future than today. If she hadn't joined the Tosaka, today, she would have escaped the curse of being a wizard, and she could have led a normal life. And today, this tension in the park, if she had reacted differently to the decision between the Tosaka and the Matu, perhaps it would have shaken her. She could have rejected the nonsense of a stranger. But, even so, she could not blame herself alone in that way. She would not have to suppress her tears completely. Kariya could absolutely never forgive this. He, who repeated the same fault twice. For this punishment, he returned to the place of those days he had left behind. Certainly there was a way to obtain forgiveness. The world to which he had once turned his back. The destiny to which he had so poorly escaped. But now he could confront that. If I thought of the one woman in the world I didn't want to see suffer. Under the sky where twilight was approaching, he stopped in front of the imposing and luxurious Western-style house. In a 10-year jump, Matu Kariya was standing in front of the doors of his house again. I think I told you never to show your face in front of me again. Sitting in front of Kariya, the little old man who spat out those detestable words was Zoken Matu, the head of the family. He was so withered that his bald head and limbs made him look as if he had been mummified, but the light deep in his eyes filled his spirit. Both his appearance and his personality made him an unusual and mysterious person. To tell the truth, not even Kariya could determine the exact age of the old man. The aberrant entry in the family register said that he was the brother of Kariya's father. But even with his great-grandfather, his third-generation ancestor, there were records of an old man named Zoken in the family tree. There was no way of knowing for how many generations this man had reigned over the Matu family. Speaking of repulsive achievements, he was a wizard who could be called immortal, lengthening and prolonging his age. A person at the root of the Matu bloodline with very little direct connection to Kariya. He was a genuine specter surviving in the current era. I heard about what happened 3 days ago. Kariya went straight to the point. There was no point in digressing into pointless conversations with this old man. Yes, it's a pity. Now we don't have any descendants with magical circuits. Don't you think it's a disgrace to resort to adopting someone else's girl? Who do you think was responsible for the fall of the Matu? In the end, the son that Byakuya ended up with turned out to be someone devoid of magic circuits. The thoroughbred line of the Matos has collapsed with this generation. But, more than your older brother Byakuya, you are the one who has realized himself in the bases of a magician, Kariya. If you had obediently received your inheritance and accepted the secrets of the Mato, we would not have pressed the circumstances. And all this is you. But Kariya, with a snort, rejected the threatening attitude of the old man who was getting even angrier by foaming at the mouth. Stop your comedy, vampire. What is the need for the line Mato to persist? Don't make me laugh. There's nothing wrong with it even if a new generation of Mato does not come along. The discussion is over since you yourself will continue to live for 200 years or 2,000 years. Since Kariya had guessed correctly, Zoken let out a suspicious smile, as if the anger up to now was a lie. That was the smile of a monster who does not even consider human emotions as fragments. As always, you're a nice guy. You talk and behave in a very frank way. Whatever you say, that's how you train me. I don't like to dwell on things. A wet sound was produced from deep in the old man's throat, as if he were laughing pleasantly. It is true. You will probably live longer than me in the distant future, longer even than Byakuya's son. Even so, a Matu heir is necessary to obtain the Grail. So that is your goal. Immortality. Zoken had his eyes on the Grail to obtain that miracle. But without Sakura you cannot obtain it. Zoken frowned. That is, it is problematic that the girl has been kidnapped. It is going to be complicated to find another virgin specimen of so high quality. Virgin. When Zoken used that term, he referred to that he had not obtained teachings of any other magician before, how it was the case of Sakura. Of the words of Zoken, Kariya understood something. You are going to abandon the girl. It was not a question, but an affirmation. He knew the old man too well. That is why he had left the house 10 years ago. That's right. Kariya sank. Sakura had been kidnapped by people with the capacity to face the old man, or that they had the sufficient force as to surprise him. Old man, you have said that you need the Grail. Zoken nodded. Let's make a deal. Zoken Matu. I will carry the name of the Matu to victory in the next war. In return, you will rescue Sakura Tosaka. Surprised for a brief moment, Zoken sneered with contempt. Don't be stupid. A failure who has never studied anything could be the master of a servant in just 1 year. You possess the secret to making that possible, do you not? With your worm control skills of which you are so proud, old man. Immediately, Zoken's face changed from that of a human to that of a wizard, all expressions fading away. Kariya, do you wish to die? Don't tell me you're worried? Uncle, I must say that I expect more from you than from Byakuya. After expanding your magic circuits with the worm crests, if we can train you hard for a year, maybe the Grail will end up selecting you. Still, I can't understand it. Why go to such lengths just for a little girl? Just let the Matu take care of the Matu's tenacity. Don't involve people from the outside who aren't involved. Again, with your admirable dedication. As if enjoying himself, Zoken showed a pleased smile, full of his evil disposition. A year had passed since Sakura Tosaka was snatched from the hand of the Matu. Honestly, Draco was disappointed. He thought that both the Tosaka and the Matu were going to try something to get the girl back, but neither family had tried anything. They had not even reported the girl as missing. In other words, they had abandoned Sakura. Meanwhile, in the house of Draco, Kurokane-san, I've finished cleaning the dishes. An energetic Sakura ran out of the kitchen with a smile on her face. Very well, Sakura. Now you can go to see the drawings in the TV. Kuroka, who was taking care of the laundry, returned her smile. Yeah, I wanted you to show me more of that senjutsu. Sakura made a pout. Silly, I can't teach you anything until you learn to feel the flow of life. Kuroka took out her tongue, making fun of the little one. The small Sakura frowned. Kurokane-san, you were bad. Draco Nisan will help me, and I will never ask you to help me again. Kuroka watched with playful eyes as she left for Draco's room. Don't bother your Nisan while he's training, or he'll get angry. I know. Once Sakura entered Draco's room, Kuroka relaxed her face and let out a sigh. Immediately, a light smile appeared on her face. And to think that such an innocent girl was going to go through such a hell. Kuroka turned her head to look in the direction of this person. Mordred, have you finished your own training? It's almost lunchtime, said the blonde-haired girl. Kuroka looked again in the direction in which Sakura had left, fixing her glance in the door of Draco's room. The history of that girl was so tragic, but, knowing Draco, there was no way that he had let her suffer. Besides, he treats her too well. He's spoiling her. It was Kuroka's turn to pout. Mordred raised an eyebrow, amused by what she was hearing. Oh, what a stink of jealousy you smell in this room. Shut up. Kuroka blushed. Well, I think I can understand you. After all, Sakura is ruining your nightlife, isn't she? She always sleeps hugging Draco. It is not as if Sakura was the only one. Kuroka gave an accusing look to Mordred. Even in this world, you still sleep in Draco's room. Damn it, I was supposed to sleep alone with him. Tisich, you finally get your true colors out. Mordred pointed her finger at Kuroka, accusing her of something. You want to monopolize Master for yourself. That's not fair. I'm his girlfriend. Who are you? Kuroka hit back. Mordred took a step back. It looked like she had taken a critical hit. Kuroka was right. She was Master's bride, while Mordred was only a servant. I am his first servant. I too have the right to spend time with Master. Sparks were flying between the eyes of the two girls. It seemed that a fight could start at any moment. The door to one room opened and a person came out. You're so noisy. I can't read quietly, Zoe said. Besides, you're going to upset Draco if you keep raising your voice. You're not Sakura, after all. For the sake of not bothering Draco, and thus avoiding him getting angry, Mordred and Kuroka decided to end this absurd fight. Sakura entered the room of Draco once more. Of course, the dragon had noticed this. The ability that Draco had with Senjutsu had reached a level where he could feel practically anything in a quite wide radius. When he was focused, he could cover a radius of a mile. Of course, this only happened when he was as focused as he is at the moment. That range got narrower depending on the situation, But this was something that Draco still had to explore. One of the biggest difficulties or disadvantages Draco had encountered was related to the leveling of his normal skills. And the reason for this was quite simple. There were no leveling opponents for Draco, and there was no place to practice without causing a worldwide scandal. And it wasn't that Draco cared about creating a scandal, but that this was going to get the attention of certain people that it was better not to get involved with. Leaving aside some light sparring with Mordred, Draco had dedicated himself to training his senjutsu and spending time with the girls. In fact, the biggest advances he had made over the course of this year were focused on senjutsu. Specifically, Draco had moved up a level in 2 skills. The first one was stealth, a quite important skill, although Draco didn't think that going up levels in this skill was going to be important in Naceverse. Still, it was always good to go up levels in skills that are going to be useful in the future, especially thinking about DxD. Draco had managed to go up 2 levels in these skills. And the other skill, for Draco the most important of all those he has at this moment, was none other than Tuki. He had only gone up 1 level, to level 8. But this was an impressive improvement, since every time Draco used Tuki, all his stats improved by 80%. Draco brought his awareness to the girl sitting next to him, copying his posture. Sakura Tosaka. To Draco's surprise, Sakura's appearance was different from the one he had seen. She did not have blue-violet hair, but had dark hair similar to her older sister's. Draco had not taken in deducing that this was due to the fact that Sakura had acquired that tone of hair when passing through the training of the Matu. Every time that Draco looked at Sakura, the hair of the girl reminded him that he had made a good work when saving her from the claws of Zoken. This chapter is for the people who doesn't know anything about the Holy Grail Wars. So here you have the basic information about them. You can skip if you have already watched the show, as this is just copy-paste from the wiki. The Holy Grail War. The Holy Grail War is a competition that decides the ownership of the Holy Grail through intense battle royale. While there have been many conflicts over supposed Holy Grails in the past, this term refers to those specifically based around masters, usually proficient magi, summoning servants, heroic spirits brought forth as familiars, and meeting in battle until only one pair is left to claim the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail is the Christian holy relic that received the blood of Christ, considered to be a noble phantasm. There have been many claims of its existence, 726 of which were investigated by the Church, and many conflicts for such artifacts have happened around the world throughout history. The name is utilized in the various Holy Grail Wars as the name of an artifact purportedly capable of granting any wish to whomever comes to claim it, rather than the real artifact, though the Church often gets involved simply because of that reason. Its advent is the ultimate goal of the various Holy Grail Wars. There are various Holy Grail Wars in the multiverse known as Naceverse, but the important one right now for Draco and his servants is the Fuyuki Frail War. The Fuyuki Holy Grail War, also called Heaven's Feel, is a ritual that has been ongoing for 200 years and a central element of the Fate series since Fate/Stay Night. Established by the Tosaka, Matu, and Einsburn families, the 3 founding families, as a means to reach Akasha, it is currently thought to be only a competition for something recognized as a possible Holy Grail. 7 Magi are chosen by the Grail as masters and, with support from the Grail, allowed to summon 7 servants to do battle. The winning pair is supposed to be able to claim the Holy Grail and utilize it to grant a wish for each of them. Its true purpose is to actually utilize the 7 servants returning to the root as a way to form a hole directly to it. At the time, there was also a serious flaw in this system, as the Grail required the energy of all 7 servants to help activate the Greater Grail and open a hole to Akasha. It would mean that all servants, including the victor servant, would have to be killed. And since the Grail can only be held by a servant, activating the Greater Grail, let alone retrieving the Holy Grail, cannot be achieved, as masters are incapable of doing so without a servant. This flaw made the Grail capable of only granting wishes to masters and servants. There has yet to be even one true winner who actually claimed the Grail in all 5 wars. And due to Ungra Mainyu being summoned in the 3rd Holy Grail War, it would be impossible for a winner to have their true wish granted in most cases. The Grail, which is normally colorless, was corrupted and turned into a manifestation of all the world's evils. It cannot grant wishes without also causing great destruction, though only the Ainsburns are directly aware of this fact. Overall, it is a minor event in the Magi world. The stakes could be considered the highest up until the Second War, as the church became involved afterward. The preparation and decision-making were done by the Mages Association. The association also held most of the power over the matter. However, since the Holy Grail was part of the name, the Holy Church would not remain silent. Fake or not, we must control all the Holy Grails. Thus the Holy Church sent arbiters to Fuyuki City, plotting to confiscate the Holy Grail when the opportunity emerged. The original purpose of the ritual was to recover the third magic lost by the Ainsburns, the Cup of Heaven. Around 1790, Justizia Lehi von Ainsburn, Nagato Tosaka, and Zoken Makiri created the system in order to create a gate leading to Akasha. At that time, the Mages Association and the Church were locked in a battle to the death, so a land in the Far East where the Church could not monitor was chosen. The Ainsburns provided the alchemy to create it and prepared the vessel for the Grail. The Tosaka provided the necessary land and called forth the servants, and the Makiri assembled the magecraft to stabilize the starting materials and design the command seals that command the servants. Back when the Tosaka were developing the ritual of the Heaven's Feel, along with the Makiri and the Ainsburn, Nagato's daughter played a greater role in the completion of the Holy Grail War system than her father. The Holy Grail War itself was devised by Justizia, and she was to become the key of the ritual. The Great Grail was created through forming a large circuit from many multi-layered crests carved onto a bare rock over 50 meters in diameter. It was covered in multiple layers of circuits, while its many geometric figures turned in place. Justizia stood in the center of it, and became the key to reenacting the third magic. The Holy Grail would have only been just a Holy Grail without her, as her will was required for Heaven's Feel. Kisher Zelrich Schweinorg acted as a witness to the event. Currently, only the Tosakas want to reach Akasha, while the Ainsburns and Makiri only want the completion of the Grail, that is, the revival of the third magic. However, this is impossible as there was never a victor for the past 4 Heaven's Feels, and the Grail became corrupted by Ungramanu after the Third War. The Great Grail requires 60 years in order to amass enough mana to summon servants, making the planning period span over generations. If the Grail is unable to utilize its energy, that which is left over can reduce the time to as little as a decade, such as in the case of the period between the Fourth and Fifth Wars. The Grail selects potential masters anywhere from years in advance to right before the start of the Holy Grail War. It favors those from the 3 founding families, and then picks out suitable magi through a mostly unknown process. There can be more than 7 potential masters, but only the first 7 who manage to summon servants gain command spells and the right to act as a master. It is possible for other unchosen people to gain the right to act as masters by contracting with masterless servants. The servants can be summoned in advance as well, but more than 2 months, such as in Berserker's Heracles' case, is an anomaly. They can be summoned far away from the site of the ritual, allowing them to be initially summoned in Europe and then brought to Fuyuki. While played off as only a battle royal where the winner is granted a wish, the real point is to fill the vessel of the Grail with the souls of all 7 servants. Defeated servants revert to being pure energy, and, while they would normally disappear from the timeline by returning to the throne as information for the true, heroic spirits, the Grail stops that process temporarily and collects them. It is possible to make a wish upon it with only the power of 5 servants, allowing it to grant most wishes. It is still incomplete, and will take at least 6 to bring it into form. Its true purpose, opening a hole to the root, requires all 7 servants. Once the vessel is filled, the energy of the heroic spirits returning to the throne is used by the Great Grail in a ritual to open a hole leading to Akasha. Due to the corruption of the ritual, most wishes will require great destruction. Karitsugu Amiya realized the Holy Grail had been corrupted when it presented him a revelation of how it would grant his wish. Instead of saving humanity, it showed him a utopia would exterminate all of humankind besides him, his wife, and his daughter. As a result, Karitsugu rejected the Grail and attempted to destroy it. Within a decade, his adopted progeny Shiro would complete this mission and ensure the malice within the tainted artifact would never threaten the planet again. Though the maximum number of servants is 7, there is an auxiliary reserve system within the Greater Grail to distribute command spells again to allow the summoning for 7 more servants. This was developed for the highly improbable situation that all 7 servants were to cooperate, but it would likely exhaust the ley line of Fuyuki. It is to be used only as an emergency measure to have 7 more servants to oppose those that have joined up. Supervision. The first and second wars went unsupervised, but the chaotic Second Holy Grail War caused them to rethink the position. Japan had been in its period of civilizing at the time, so the possibility of witnesses spreading the serious damage occurring needed to be controlled even in such a remote area. It is a conflict between magi, so there is no one in the Mages Association suitable to act as a mediator because of the political implications. They instead sought out the church, enemies to the magi, an external authority, and, as it utilized the name of the Holy Grail, one of their most sacred artifacts, it was not possible for them to let its name be used lightly. The church acts under the pretense that they cannot ignore the possibility that it actually is the cup that received the blood of Christ, but they already know that it is not related to it. They still send a supervisor, because it is too powerful to ignore, because they didn't want someone to use the Grail for their selfish desire. They are not concerned about magi reaching the root, but someone affecting the actual world is too large a threat. They wish to instead guide a magus seeking the route towards victory to keep such a possibility from happening. The Holy Grail War is unknown to the general populace. The church is responsible for the cover-up work in which they manipulate information by modifying the memories of victims and covering up the battle damage while the Mages Association handles the media. The association has the Einsburns cover the cost of any collateral damage. They will punish the landowner should it get too out of hand, such as in the Heavensfield scenario. In a clearing among a series of bushes somewhere in the small mountain town of Fuyuki, Waver Velvet began his preparations for the invocation ritual after making sure he was completely alone. Waver's nerves were completely strained all day by the chicken's incessant squawking, so much so that a ritual for the purification of the mind was necessary before the main ritual could be performed. The shape of the magic circle had been drawn on the floor when the blood of the chickens was still warm. He had practiced this procedure on several occasions, drawing the 4 patterns of the game within the circle of invocation. There must have been no mistake. Closing, 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 closing. 5 perfections for each repetition. And now, let the trace symbols be destroyed instead of me. Waver carefully spread the blood of the chickens on the floor while reciting the incantation. In the subway workshop of the Tosaka residence, in the same small mountain village, the same preparations were being made for the same ritual. You first, O silver, O steel, O foundation stone, O archduke of the contract. Hear me in the name of our great master, Archmagus Schweinorg. Let the descending winds be like a wall. Let the gates in all directions be closed, rising above the crown, and let the roads that divide in 3 directions to the kingdom change position. Tosaka Tokiomi recited the spell loudly as he drew the magic circle, using not the blood of a sacrificed victim, but the melted essence of the magic gems. To prepare for this day, Tosaka had deliberately used all the prana-infused gems stored in its treasury. Besides him was the Kodomine family, father and son, Risei and Kariya. Kariya was intensely observing the sacred relic placed on the altar. At first glance, it looked like a broken fragment of a mummy, but in fact, it was said to be a fossil of the skin left by the first snake in the ancient world several eons ago. Kariya could not help but feel a wave of fear at the thought of the heroic spirit that would be invoked. The reason for Tokiomi's trust could finally be understood. No servant could defeat the heroic spirit that Tokiomi had chosen. Simultaneously, in the distant Einsburn castle, Amiya Kuritsugu was examining the complete state of the invocation circle engraved on the floor of the ceremonial room. Will such a simple ritual be enough? For Irisville, who was standing aside watching the procedure, it was quite surprising that the preparations were so simple. It may be disappointing, but to invoke a servant, it was never necessary to have an extravagant evocation ceremony. Kariya began the explanation while carefully checking that there were no broken or wrong lines in the patterns drawn with the mercury. The reason is that, in fact, it is not the power of the magician that invokes the servant, but the power of the Holy Grail. As a master, I only acted as the cord that connects the heroic spirit to this world in which we reside, and merely provide it with the prana necessary for its materialization in this world. As if satisfied with the state of the invocation circle, Kariya nodded and stood up. The sacred relic was placed on the altar, the sheath of the legendary sword. According to this, victory should be within our grasp. Have you properly memorized the incantations necessary for the invocation? Mado Zoken kept reminding Kariya over and over again for security reasons. The latter nodded in the midst of darkness. It was filled with the horrible smell of rot and dampness, darkness as green as that of the depths of the ocean. This was the warehouse of the worms hidden deep beneath the floor of the residence of the Mado, which stood on the hill of the small mountain town. That's right, just halfway through the ceremony, add 2 more lines to the incantation. What do you want to say? Zoken smiled sinisterly at Kariya's confused expression. Kariya, you should know by now that as a mage, your abilities are not only below 1 or 2 positions of the other masters. This will affect the basic abilities of the servant. If that is the case, it can only be remedied through the servant class, and we must improve the parameters from the root. Predetermine the servant class by altering the summoning spell. Usually, the assignment of servant classes is inevitably decided by the attributes of the heroic spirit invoked. However, there are exceptions. 2 classes can be designated by the invoker beforehand. One of them is Assassin. The heroic spirit belonging to this class can be assumed to be one of the groups of assassins who have inherited the name of Hassan I-Sabah. And the other class is for all heroic spirits and can be manifested as long as the summoner incorporates the necessary external ingredients. Therefore, on this occasion, we will give the servant the attribute of madness enhancement. Zoken declared this with a face full of joy, as if welcoming the disastrous implications that were contained in it. Kariya, like the Berserker Master, fight for me with everything you have. On that day, incantations from different lands and addressed to different beings were recited almost at the same time, a harmony so coincidental that it could hardly be described as an accident of chance. Because all the magicians had the same hope about a miracle, the call of these humans to the heroes on the other side of the universe, who would brutally murder each other to achieve this miracle, began to resound on the earth at the same time. Ready, dash! This was the moment that would present itself as his greatest test as a magician. If he lost, he would even lose his life. Waver knew this, but he was not the least bit afraid. A passion that desired strength, a determination that pursued its goal relentlessly. Based on these qualities, Waver Velvet was definitely an amazing magician. Ready? Let your body rest under my rule. Let my destiny rest on your sword. If you submit to the call of the Holy Grail, and if you obey this mind, this reason, then you must respond. The sensation of prana surrounded his body. This malevolent cold and the agony caused by the whistling and circulation of the magical circuits within one's body was something that no magician could escape. Waver clenched his teeth as he continued to recite the incantation. I take my oath here. I am the person who will become the virtue of all the heavens. I am the person who is covered with all the vileness of the kingdom of Hades. The view of Kariya was darkened. The family crest of the Amiya, which had been passed down through the generations and had been engraved on their back, began to recite the incantations as if it were an individual entity as an aid to the thaumaturgical method of Kariya. Kariya's heart, in a dimension that was beyond the control of his mind, began to beat rapidly as if it were the hasty hand of a clock. His flesh, which was tormented by the prana that gathered in the air, had already forgotten its functions as a human being. Instead, it had become a component of the mysterious ceremony, a circuit that simply connected the ethereal with the material. Kuritsugu paid no attention to the severe pain created by this, which was enough to make one scream at full power, and concentrated on pronouncing the incantation. Even the presence of Irisveal, who stood beside him holding her breath, was no longer present in his consciousness. Adding the forbidden alien ingredient to the summoning spells, Kariya included the 2 lines of spells that would rob the summoned heroic spirit of his sanity and degrade the hero to the level of a berserker. But you will serve with your eyes covered by chaos. You, bound within a prison of madness. I am he who commands those chains dash. The difference between Kariya and the other magicians was that his magical circuits were made of organisms that lived inside him as parasites. The anguish necessary to incite them and activate their circuits was incomparable to that suffered by other magicians. As he recited the incantation, his limbs moved in spasms, and blood gushed from his shattered capillaries. Tears of blood flowed from his right eye, down his cheek. Still, Kariya did not lose his concentration, thinking about the task he was carrying on his back. Then he would be unable to turn back at this moment. You 7 heavens, wrapped in a trinity of words, come beyond the rings that hold you back and be the hands that protect the balanced dash. With this concluding his prayers, Tokiomi felt that the acceleration of the prana that ran through his body had reached its greatest limit. Thunder and lightning resounded, accompanied by clouds carried by a powerful wind. In the pressure of a blizzard that even prevented people who watched, like Kariya, from opening their eyes, the patterns of the circle of invocation shone with a bright light. Finally, the magical circuits had connected with the plane to which man does not belong. From the dazzling light that shone endlessly, the golden silhouette of a standing man emerged. Marveling at the great solemnity, Father Risei murmured in his sleep without realizing it. We have won, Kariya. Our battle has been won. That desire was transferred to them in this way. Arriving from the other side and arriving here, a legendary illusion wrapped between the tornado and the lightning. Originally of human origin, but separated from the mortal plane, raised to the level of elementals through powers beyond man. The place where early supernatural beings were gathered, from the throne of heroes that possessed the suppressed power of the gods. Heroic spirits woven from dreams of countless ordinary men had descended to earth all at the same time. Then, in a forest in the middle of the night, in a stone warehouse surrounded by darkness, at each of those locations someone now asked a question in a majestic voice. I ask you, are you the master who has called me? Draco smiled. So, it has started, huh? You've noticed it too, haven't you? Draco asked. So much powerful magical energy coming out at the same time. There was no way we couldn't notice that, Zoe replied. Yes, that was interesting how much less, Kuroka said in a selfless voice. It seems that many formidable rivals have appeared, Master, Mordred said with a smile. When are we going to fight? Draco smiled at Mordred. Do you want to fight so badly? Ah, of course, Mordred replied as she folded her arms. I've been waiting for years to have a good fight to the death. The closest I ever came was when I was against that fallen angel, but he was too weak. Well, I have a surprise for you. You just have to wait a few days. Draco dropped the surprise while smiling mysteriously. Teach, you and your desire to be cool, Mordred complained. Sakura had a slight smile as she watched the interactions between the elders. Draco had already explained to the girl that they would participate in a dangerous fight, but she didn't have to worry. The servants had reached an agreement that at least one of them would be protecting Sakura in case Zoken tried to recover the youngest daughter of the Tosaka. He was an unpredictable man, and you never know what tricks he was going to try. Draco was thinking, recapitulating events that were going to happen in the next days. If he was not mistaken, Waver should be accompanying Iskandar to borrow some books. That's when Iskandar reveals to Waver his desire to conquer the world, while Waver tells him that he only wants to have recognition from the Association of Magicians. This is also when Iskandar shows his noble phantasm Gordius wheel for the first time. An A+ level noble phantasm, capable of transforming the entire Shinto area into scorched earth in less than an hour. But this was not the strongest noble phantasm on his Kandar, although Draco was not afraid of either. Kiritsugu Amiya had noticed that Saber and he did not make a good team if they fought together. His ideas about how to deal with the war were very different, so he had devised a strategy to deal with this war and make the most of Saber's skills. Servant and master would act as completely separate. To begin with, there is no limit to the range of the contract between the two. Regardless of distance, a command spell can control a servant, and prana can still be provided unless the master passes out. That the master and servant remain together is only an act of mutual understanding. Prudence dictates that the decisions of battle cannot be left to the servant alone. The master needs to remain on the battlefield to control the servant. If Kiritsugu had decided to move independently, without knowing about Saber's actions, of course, it didn't mean that he trusted her completely. Kiritsugu entrusted Irisveal with the task of being the agent to supervise Saber's actions. That was not at all risky. For example, if Kiritsugu's servant were to act in a rebellious manner, there was no fear that he would want to kill Irisveal while he still wanted to obtain the Grail. Without Irisveal, even if Saber defeated all the other servants, she would not be able to obtain the Grail. The Grail container that Irisveal carried is absolutely necessary for Fuyuki's Grail to materialize. Therefore, Saber needs to defend Irisveal from the other masters. Such an irregular team formation was only because of the respective battle tactics of Kiritsugu and Saber. The heroic spirit of the knights, Saber, is a fighter who has servant skills and the properties of his noble phantasm completely focused on a full frontal battle. His mentality would never consent to an action that was not appropriate to it. On the other hand, his master Amiya Kiritsugu is essentially an assassin who makes cunning plans, and there is no chance that the two of them together can generate anything more than a normal plan. Instead, when it comes to affinities, Kiritsugu assessed that Irisveal would be much more suitable as Saber's partner. His wife is definitely a homunculus, but she is still part of the noble Einsburn family, and as such, she has a natural elegance and dignity. Irisveal is definitely the kind of lady to whom a knight would dedicate his loyalty. In fact, in the last days they have lived together after the invocation, Irisveal and Saber had already developed a mutual understanding and respect. Irisveal's natural air of nobility was similar to that of a princess in Saber's time, and Saber's nobility was a perfect match for Irisveal's good birth. Therefore, the master by contract, Kiritsugu, proposed that his wife Irisveal act as a substitute master in his place, which Saber readily agreed to. His problem in reality was that she was uncomfortable cooperating with Kiritsugu, and rather than let her wield her sword freely, Irisveal was actually much more appropriate, on that they had agreed. So, the two of them entered into a master-servant relationship according to the knight's oath, very different from a servant's contract, and that is how they were preparing for Heaven's Feel. Finally, the beginning of the war had arrived. After the invocation of the last servant, Caster, Tokiomi Tosaka, and Kodomine Kiriya had decided to take the first step. Assassin was lying on the ground, trying to enter Tosaka's residence when his hand was pierced by a spear thrown from above. An intense pain, fear, and above all, surprise. The simple attack of the spear was completely unexpected. Assassin turned his head upwards, looking for the one who had thrown it. No, there was no need to look. At the top of the roof of the Tosaka residence, a golden shadow rose magnificently. That divine splendor that even steals the dignity of the starry sky and puts the moon to shame. The anger of being wounded made Assassin forget the pain, but all he could do was fear its overwhelming coercion. You worm that crawls on the ground, from whom do you seek forgiveness? The golden man asked the assassin who was hiding on the ground, looking down at him with a pair of scornful, burning crimson eyes, indifferently. You cannot look at me. Worms can only look at the ground when they die, like the worms that they are. Around the golden shadow, more flashes appeared, growing in countless numbers. Suddenly gliding through the air emerged swords, spears, none of them the same as the other, all of them weapons treasured with dazzling ornaments. And they were all pointed at Assassin. I cannot win. Without even thinking about it, Assassin sensed it instinctively. To win against him is impossible. It is stupid to even think about facing him. If he is able to beat Assassin, a servant, it means that that golden shadow is definitely a servant too. And if he is preventing an invasion of the Tosaka mansion, then his master is Tokiomi. In other words, he must be the heroic spirit archer. Is there no reason to fear it? In the promise to his master, Assassin knew that there was no contradiction in Kariya's words. In the face of such an overwhelming enemy, fear is, yes, there is no room for fear. There can only be despair and abandonment. Cutting through the air in a roar, countless bright leaves began to fall over Assassin. Assassin felt the stares, the relatives watching from the outside. The first servant to fall in the Holy Grail's fourth war met a horrific end without even offering a counterattack, witnessed by the other masters. And at the last moment, Assassin understood the true intention of his master Kodomine Kariya and the leader Tosaka Tokiomi. With Assassin's false death, the War of the Holy Grail had begun. Assassin is dead, Draco suddenly said. After putting Sakura to sleep, Draco had called the girls to talk to them about the war. With Assassin's false death, the ritual called Holy Grail War to reach Heaven's Field had begun. What was the reaction of Mordred? She understood the concept of the Holy Grail War better than the other two servants, who had had no reaction beyond so fast, or if he died so quickly it was because he was weak. For a servant to die so quickly was extremely rare, as none of the masters would let them use their noble phantasms so soon. The noble phantasms are the trump cards of the servants. Deploying your noble phantasm quickly could bring you victory and end an enemy servant. However, your identity would be revealed to all other masters and servants. This is very counterproductive, for then you would reveal your identity along with your weaknesses. That is why they are not usually used at the beginning of the war and are reserved for the end or life and death combats. However, the peculiarity of Gilgamesh's noble phantasm made it very difficult to guess his identity. Unlike Excalibur, Gate of Babylon, it was not so conspicuous and did not make clear who Archer was. But this is a false death, Draco said. The girls were surprised. What did Draco mean? Assassin indeed died, and many of the masters have seen it, Draco explained. However, that is only one of the assassins. What do you mean? Zoe asked with a scowl. The assassin of this Holy Grail War is one of the Hassan-i-Sabah. More specifically, he is Hassan of the 100 Faces. His noble phantasm is one of the Zabaniya, delusional illusion. Assassin is a single entity, but he possesses a compartmentalized soul and multiple personalities that allow him to divide his spiritual potential to materialize up to 80 different servants. Though limited by his physical body during life, his 1,000 souls are now free of such limitations as a spiritual entity. As each segment can materialize as an individual, they can all be materialized simultaneously in different shapes. Even if one of them has died, there are still 79 of them there. 80 servants? Kuroka asked. Didn't you say that Assassin was weak? How can a servant who is divided into 80 be weak? It is as I said, Assassin is the weakest. Draco did not step back from his statement. While Assassin has many numbers, none possess a noble phantasm of their own. Any of us could easily take them on, as our noble phantasms can eradicate them. At the same time, Zoe just has to keep a safe distance and finish them off arrow for arrow. In a war where brute force prevails, mere numbers can do nothing to win. And when it comes to numbers, Ryder is the best at it. Mordred seemed to have realized something. That means that the church, Kiriai Kotomine, and Tosaka are in cahoots. Draco smiled. That's right. Although I think this is an inefficient strategy on Tokiomi's part. They have the strongest servant. Tokiomi would only have to wait until the end of the war to force Gilgamesh to use his most powerful noble phantasm and take over the Grail. So many schemes are just a waste of time, aren't they? Kuroka asked. Exactly, Draco nodded. Besides, it only puts a damper on your own servant, which will take its toll later. Tokiomi Tosaka, his attitude to war will lead him to be betrayed by his own servant and his disciple. Gilgamesh will find in Kariya a person much more interesting than his master, while Kariya is Kariya. But they are not the only ones who have plans for this war, Draco told them. Kiritsugu Amiya and Saber also have a couple of surprises. The word Saber caught Mordred's attention. Hey, master, who is the servant Saber of this war? Mordred asked with excitement in her voice. Draco smiled mysteriously, which caused a slight chill in Mordred's body. That is a surprise I have in store for you, my little princess, Draco said with that smile. In a few days, you'll know who she is. Don't be like that, master. Mordred pouted out her complaints. But Draco didn't give in to her. The surprise was too great to ruin her at this point. Well, let's get back to the point. Kiritsugu is the official master of Saber. He's not going to act as the master. It is Irisveil Einsburn who will be acting as master, while Kiritsugu will be acting in the shadows. It's different from what Tosaka and Kiriai want to do, but the essence is the same, Mordred said as she clenched her teeth. They are all cowards, running away from the battlefield and attacking from behind. Isn't that the same thing you did in the past, Emo-chan? For now, I want Zoe to go and guard the airport, Draco ordered. Okay, who do you want me to watch? Zoe asked. You'll know the moment you see them. They're both unmistakable. Just at the time when Amiya Kiritsugu and Hizomiya were in a cheap hotel in the Shinto area, the charter flight Valerie Italia from Germany was landing on runway F of the airport near Fuyuki City. Even though they were under the same freezing winter wind, that wind from Japan could not be compared in intensity to that of Einsburn Castle. Looking at the dim light of the afternoon sun, Irisveil von Einsburn felt her heart relaxing. So this is the country in which Kiritsugu was born. It is a good place. Although she had been able to get to know this place through photos and similar things, Irisveil felt refreshed by the air that passed through her body. Not only did her heart relax, coming to Japan posing as a passenger, she could not bring dresses from the castle, but brought as common clothes as possible to at least get to know the city. With her short-heeled boots and a skirt below her knees, her movements felt as light as if she had been born again. However, for an Einsburn who had lived a life far removed from the common sense of the outside world all along, the attire she thought would be suitable for impersonating the common man was already beginning to fail. Her silk blouse, her knee-length boots, her casual coat of silver fox fur, all came directly from an upper-class inn. It was completely visible that she was a rare gem from a particular birthplace with a very particular tailor. These were clothes clearly suitable for a model, but to Irisveil, who had grown up with polished jewelry, they seemed intimate enough. Although Irisveil had indeed considered these clothes suitable for camouflage in the city areas, but it was simply impossible for a beauty like her to disappear from the sight of the general public. So, what do you think about the travel plan? One step forward, Irisveil asked the short servant, who was leaving the road. Nothing in particular. It was more tiring than I would have expected. There was no lie within her words. Her blue eyes were perfectly serene. The journey was smooth for Irisveil and Artoria, but things were soon to get complicated.